Be careful what you wish for. They may come true. The problem is that I wanted what I have now so badly that I now question my sanity. I committed the greatest evil. Oh well, I helped, but I did it for something that in the light of day turned out to be meaningless. Probably temporary insanity ruined my life, and it was enhanced by a good dose of real, old-fashioned lust. My only excuse is that we are all human. We all make mistakes. If you add to this the fact that, damn, how do I say this? Okay, I've always been a princess. My dad treated me like a princess. Every man I've ever dated has done the same thing, and so has my husband. I'm used to getting everything I want whenever I want it. My life has always been perfect. The house I am in now was designed and built for me. It's not the biggest house, but it's very special. It is located in a beautiful area of the most prestigious suburb in our state. My husband worked hard to give me this house, and I took it for granted. We got married 5 years ago, when we were 25. We were together for 3 years. I met him at his college graduation. I came to see my friend's graduation, and we ran into each other. It was love at first sight. I've never met a man who looked at me the way Terry did. I saw our future in his eyes. Terry was completely devoted to me. He wasn't the most handsome man I knew, and he wasn't the biggest, but he tried so hard to impress me that I was floored. Terry had a great career as an engineer, but he was the black sheep of his family. All the men in his family were either police officers or firefighters. Everything in our lives was perfect until 3 months ago when everything changed. Once again, it was a celebration and an unplanned meeting that ruined everything. I was at an event at Terry's work where he was receiving an award for some modification to a car part. As Terry stood up to receive his award and give his speech, I stood up to get a better view of him and an uninterrupted view of the stage to take photos. I was so busy looking at my husband through the camera lens that I didn't pay attention to where I was going. I came across a mountain in the shape of a man. My camera flew and I fell to the floor. I looked up and began to mumble an apology, but froze mid-sentence. Bent over me stood the largest and most handsome man I had ever seen. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, his voice more like a rumble than words. It seemed as if the mountain itself was speaking. The timbre and pitch of his voice reminded me of Barry White. It sounded more like stones rolling down a mountainside than words. He extended a huge paw, more like a paw than a hand. Without any effort, he lifted me from the floor and set me on my feet. I stood and looked at him, too shocked to speak. "So are you okay?" he thundered again. I was able to nod several times. I was overcome with such powerful emotions that they overwhelmed my ability to reason. I heard that this happens, but I never believed it. Someone handed me my broken and forgotten camera, and I stood and looked at him. Sorry for bumping into you," I muttered. "No problem," he said. "Do you work here?" "Ah, I'm here with my, husband," I managed. Here with him." I nervously pointed to the stage. "Ooh," he said. "Terry Stevens. Sheer perfection. Now it's clear why he strives so much. My brother talks about him all the time. But now that I've seen who he comes home to, I understand why my brother never had a chance." His compliment amazed me, and of course I blushed. His figure seemed too primal to be contained in a suit. It seemed that he would rip the seams on this fragile robe at any moment. "Do you work here?" I asked. "I would like to," he replied. "I'm not smart enough for this kind of work. I'm Fred Lee. I work at a sports club in the city center." He rummaged in his pocket and handed me the card. "The first lesson is free," he said. I clutched the card in my sweaty palm as if it were real gold. "It was nice meeting you," he said, and then he left. I'm sure that if he asked me to leave with him, I would leave. My husband, the presentation, and the speech he was giving at that moment were forgotten. 2 days later, I already had a membership to the club and a place on its growing list of clients. I later learned that Fred's client list included only rich women. Most of them were married, and most of them were over 40 years old. I was the youngest woman on his list, 29 years old. I'd like to say that he had to try really hard to get me, but I'd be lying. Before I met Fred, I loved Terry so much that I would never have thought about sex with another man. But from our first training session, it was clear that we both knew that sooner or later we would end up in bed. Our training was abandoned as soon as Fred came to me. Sex with Fred was hardly sex. It seemed like a new word was needed for this. A week later, I was Fred's woman. Terry, of course, loved me, so it didn't take him long to realize something was going on. He was also smart enough to determine that I started acting weird around the same time I started going to the gym. I was too blinded by my infatuation to notice that Terry, in fact, understood everything. So when he walked into the gym and saw me kissing Fred, I was afraid to go home. Terry immediately went to the manager's office and canceled my membership. He explained to the club owner why he was doing this. When the club owner found out what was happening, he fired Fred. Fred had a large list of clients, but Terry's company, through its health insurance, generated almost half of the club's business. When Terry came home that evening, he didn't even talk to me. He changed his clothes and immediately left again. I was shocked. I prepared a story to explain what he saw, but as I watched the black taillights of his 2014 Mustang quickly disappear from our driveway, I knew I had a problem. Terry returned home long after I had gone to bed. I tried to wait for him, but I succumbed to stress, tension, and fear. The next morning, I got up early and found him getting out of the shower. He slept in our guest room, which told me a lot. Terry avoided me for the next couple of days. He left before I woke up and returned only after I fell asleep. Finally, 3 days after the incident, I cornered him. I rehearsed what I was going to say, but I didn't have time. "Terry, what you saw," I began. "Brittany, I think it would be best if you stayed with your parents for a few days," he said. "But how will we solve our problems if we don't?" I started again. He raised his hand, signaling that I should shut up. "Brittany, before we can start discussing how we solve our problems, I have to decide if we can solve them," he said. I was shocked. "To do this," he continued, "I need to calm down and let my anger subside so I can make a rational decision rather than being driven by an emotional reaction." "But Terry, I began. "Don't, Brittany," he said. "You have lost the right to say such things. I'll call your parents and tell them to wait for you. You can take your car." I was shocked. There has never been a time in my life that someone didn't want me to be around them. As he left, he turned to me one last time. "I'm expecting delivery this morning. I told the man that most likely no one would be home. Not that it matters now, but I'll move it when I get home," he said. My shock turned to fear. I had no idea what was happening to Terry. It wasn't like him. Terry never did or purchased anything without discussing it with me. But then I realized that many things were no longer as they should be. When Terry left, the fact that he didn't say a word or kiss me goodbye didn't go unnoticed. I considered ignoring his order. After all, this was my home too. Terry was my husband, not the owner. However, I realized that it was not in my best interest to irritate him. I started packing some things when my cell phone rang. "Hey, baby, can you talk?" asked Fred. "Yes," I answered. "Old Terry isn't kidding, is he?" he said. "Just so you know, we will have to meet somewhere else from now on. My boss fired me." I didn't know what to say. He started telling me about his other options and how easy it would be for him to move to another club. I was amazed at the thought that I would still want to be with him. What amazed me even more was that less than an hour later, we were having sex in my bed. Fred looked around the house like a kid in a candy store. It was obvious that the house and well-kept, if modest, yard had made an impression on him. As we were talking about what would happen next, a tow truck pulled into the lot. We watched from the window as two men unloaded some kind of car. I wanted to look under the cover of the car to see what exactly Terry had bought. For some reason, this car scared me terribly. I still couldn't understand that Terry had made such a large purchase without consulting me. Terry and I always did everything together. We made all decisions together. And then suddenly he started doing something without saying a word to me, let alone asking for advice. After the delivery guys left, I told Fred that I had to leave too. It's a 3-hour drive to my parents' place, and I haven't packed my things yet. I also needed to clean the room so Terry wouldn't know what we were doing there. Fred promised to call me in the evening and left. When I arrived to my parents, they could not understand what was happening. My parents loved Terry, and the fact that I came home greatly disturbed them. I told them that Terry was just working on some project and needed space. It worked for the first few days, but on Saturday morning, I woke up to find only my mother at home. "Where is Dad?" I asked her at breakfast. "He went into town to talk to Terry," she said. "Honey, we know that something is going on between you. You've been here for 3 days, and he hasn't called you even once. You look terrible, but this man worships the ground you walk on. Now, this may be exactly what you said, but it could be something else. Your dad just wants to help." Dad returned home around 8 o'clock in the evening. He was all smiles. He spoke to his mother. "Oh my God, he is 67, he said. "He has 67 of what?" asked my mother. "Our son-in-law has a 1967 Mustang Fastback," my dad said with obvious delight. "Doesn't he have a new Mustang?" Mom asked. "Why does he need another one, especially an older one, who is already 47 years old?" I heard Dad tell her the next part in a quiet voice. It's like he didn't want me to hear it. "I think he's trying to overcome something. You know, Terry, when something bothers him, he completely immerses himself in a new project. There's nothing wrong with that," he said. Mom nodded and went to the kitchen to prepare him something to eat. Then Dad came up to me. "You must come home tomorrow," he said. "I don't know what stupid thing you did, but you need to fix it." I was stunned. My dad never spoke to me in that tone. His face softened. "Brittany, I love you, honey, but so does Terry. In all the time you've been together, I've never seen him like this. He always talks about what you are going to do together and how much he loves you. You know that we have an agreement with him. Your firstborn will be named after me. But today he was completely different. He didn't talk about the future at all. He didn't talk about you either. Like you won't be a part of his life anymore," he said. I felt as if a cold hand grabbed me by the throat. It was already late to start the long trip, but I still packed my things and said goodbye to my parents. I left very early the next morning. I didn't need an alarm clock because I didn't sleep a wink all night. I looked at my watch. I was on the road before dawn. Even stopping for breakfast when the sun came up, I was moving at a good speed, although I got into a small traffic jam, which slowed me down. When I got home, it was already about 8 in the morning. The breakfast stop delayed me longer than I thought. I intended to get home before Terry left for work. The strangest thing for me was that Terry started work at 9. It only took him half an hour to get to work. He should have been home. At least my keys still worked. I entered the house and saw a huge mess. Our house, which usually looked like it was magazine ready, was in terrible shape. It seemed like some drunken racer lived here. I had to wade through alcohol bottles, car parts, car magazines, and stacks of notes. And that's just in the living room. It was the same story in the office. The kitchen looked like it was run by a child and even a person with an alcohol addiction. There were half-empty bowls of cereal, pizza boxes, and even more bottles of alcohol everywhere. I walked into our bedroom and was amazed. There was not a single item here that was out of place. It seemed like no one had come here since I left. The chest of drawers from which I took some of my things was still slightly open, just as I had left it. I walked down the hallway and saw Terry sleeping in one of the other bedrooms. For some reason, this hurt me more than anything else. I would have understood this if Terry had known that I had sex with Fred in our room. But since he didn't know, it meant, as my father had warned, that Terry was clearly cutting me out of his life and his heart. I had to proceed very carefully. It was also clear that I didn't know what I wanted. My head was constantly spinning. When I was around Fred, I couldn't think. It felt like my brain was simply shutting down and my body was taking control. When Fred wasn't around and my brain was functioning, I realized I was doing terrible things. I spent almost the entire day cleaning the house. Since I didn't hear from Fred, I had time to think. I realized that I was in trouble. But it seemed to me that this was not something that I could not cope with. Among our acquaintances, there were several couples in which one of the partners stumbled and started an affair on the side. Most of them were able to cope with this. As far as I know, it was not an easy process, but they did it. I was sure that we could do it too. I started cooking dinner as soon as I finished cleaning. I made Terry's favorite dish, stir fry, with steamed vegetables. I also made myself as beautiful as I could. I put on makeup as if we were going out somewhere, but I chose simple clothes. I put on the old shorts that Terry loved to see me in, topped with one of his Mustang t-shirts. My image said that I was ready to meet my man. Could I put on baggy clothes and a gorilla mask, the result would be the same. I started to get nervous when I heard Terry's Mustang approaching and pulling into the driveway. He walked into the house, looked straight through me, threw his briefcase into the office, and walked up the stairs. I was stunned. It seemed to me that perhaps he had not noticed me. Perhaps he didn't realize I was back. A few minutes later, he came down the stairs again. He looked around, found his iPod, attached it to his running shorts, and left the house. I couldn't understand what was happening. Terry usually spent some time with me before going for a run. It was a time where we sat and discussed our day and what had happened while we were apart. If we were going out somewhere, he would actually sometimes go for a run first to make sure he was on time. But I couldn't understand where we were going if he went running so early. Either way, it was a good sign. The run is over, and we can sit down and talk. However, when he returned, it was like a scene from a movie. He walked past me, ignoring my greeting. I felt like one of those characters in a movie where a person dies but doesn't understand it. They try to communicate with others, but they realize that no one sees or hears them. He went into the kitchen, took the phone, and ordered pizza. Then he went upstairs and took a shower, almost as if he'd done this so many times that he had it all figured out down to the second. He came down the stairs again in an old t-shirt and sweatpants, just as the doorbell rang. The pizza had arrived. He grabbed the pizza and a bottle of soda from the refrigerator and headed straight to the garage. I was stunned. He hummed a song as he passed me. You'll never know if you're a victim or a fool. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about you. Love was good, and you took advantage of it, but apparently I'm not the one. Terry loved to pick out songs that reflected his feelings to listen to while jogging or working. I wish I knew what song he was listening to so I could understand what mood he was in and what he was feeling. This would help me understand if it would be difficult for me to fix everything, or if it would just take time. I waited a moment and then opened the garage door. I saw Terry sitting on a stool. He had a wrench in one hand and a slice of pizza in the other. Our usually immaculate garage was littered with various parts. I expected him to be working on his new project, but it seemed like he was just dismantling the car. I didn't understand why he would buy a car and then dismantle it. I was sure it had something to do with getting me out of my head. All I could do was wait. That was what he told me from the very beginning. When he's ready, we'll talk. Perhaps we can talk this evening. How long can he sit in the garage? A very long time, as it turned out. He completely immersed himself in his music and project. By the time I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore, he was still there, humming along to the music on his iPod and tearing apart that car. When I woke up the next morning, he was gone. I must admit that what happened did not live up to my expectations. I expected a lot of screaming, talking, and tormenting before we decided that we were both to blame. Although it's mostly my fault, Terry is also to blame for some of it. We would dedicate ourselves to repairing the marriage and each other, and gradually everything would return to normal. In the future, Terry would have done the same thing, and I would have forgiven him. Our marriage would become stronger. But apparently Terry didn't know how a normal marriage should work. I sat down at the kitchen table with no idea what would happen next. The phone ringing at least distracted me from what was happening. Hey babe, sorry I disappeared for a few days, but your hubby really messed me up, Fred said. Hearing his voice, I felt the stench again. I knew I should hang up, but I am a woman who needs and deserves a lot of attention. Besides, just listening to him couldn't do any harm. I also wanted to know what he meant. I can't find a job anywhere, he said. Not a single fitness club or gym in the city will hire me. My clients are starting to refuse my services because I am not allowed to train them anywhere. Most clubs not only won't hire me, but won't allow me to train their clients in their gyms. Everyone's afraid to be condemned if I start pestering another rich lady. I should have punched your husband in the face. I have to admit that I was surprised. Terry was an attractive and charming man. That's why I married him. But I never expected him to deal with Fred so easily. I always imagined any conflict between them as a physical confrontation in which Fred would easily beat my husband. It also made me feel like Fred, as a better man, was more deserving of me. But Terry destroyed Fred without much effort. I almost laughed. "Is he at home?" asked Fred. I was sure I detected a note of fear in his voice. "No, he's at work," I replied. "Great, I'll be with you in 10 minutes," he said. 10 minutes later, he appeared at the door. The result was predictable. The problem was that Fred became like a banned substance. However, this time everything was different. I noticed something. Something was missing. There was something more. Something was definitely wrong. Sex became the same. Perhaps it was that the man I thought was virtually invulnerable began to show his vulnerability. The man who dominated me and seemed like a force of nature was himself defeated, demoralized, and depressed by Terry. Meanwhile, I began to notice how sexy the man I married was. The real problem was that he didn't want anything to do with me anymore. "How is your husband?" he asked when we finished. "He's so angry he won't even talk to me," I said. "It's like I'm not there." "He's trying to burn you out of his heart," he chuckled. "I wonder if he can do it." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Some men in his situation find a core," he said. "They try different ways. A couple of guys tried to fight me. Some smarter ones paid me to leave their wives alone. One hired a hitman to take me out. It was bad. I had to come back here. But your hubby, he's smart as hell, and he has dignity, big and huge manhood." "What?" I asked. "Don't you see?" he asked. He walked into the club, took one look at me, assessed me, and started a war. He realized that the fight was not in his favor, so he fought on a different level. I took one woman away from him, or at least that's how I saw it. He tried to take all the women away from me. This bastard is scary. In less than 5 minutes, he seemed to completely destroy my world and my existence. Every club in town, every club in the state didn't just say no. They said, hell no to me. I even offered to work for free at some of them if I could train my clients there. "And now you are telling me what I expected," he said. "What exactly?" I asked, slightly amused by his concern. "Besides the backbone, he also seems to have self-respect," he said. "Of course there is," I said. "I wouldn't marry a man who didn't respect himself." He just laughed. "You don't even understand what's going on, do you?" he asked. "He loves you or loves you. You were his biggest weakness, but he feels betrayed by you. Some men would struggle with this. Love would struggle with self-respect. But it seems that in his case, self-respect won out. He burns you out of his heart. He's just not the forgiving type." "What do you mean by this?" I asked. "I think he's done with you," he chuckled. He saw my reaction and laughed. "Accept it, darling. You've used all your tricks. You dressed up and made yourself sexy, but he doesn't care. Your charm doesn't work on him anymore." "What should I do?" I asked. "Damn it, why are you asking me?" he asked. "How should I know? I've never been in love in my life." "But you," I started. "You." "What? You can say it. I had sex with you. I never told you I was in love with you or anything like that. If you're looking for love, you won't find it with me." "You ruined my life," I screamed. "If you were so happy, you should not have sex with anyone other than your husband," he said. Besides ignoring you, what else has he done?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "This could go down at least 2 paths," he said. He might just give you a silent punishment as the first part of your punishment. If so, he may be planning some very unpleasant things for you before he forgives you. This would be the best case scenario. Did he block your access to bank accounts or something? No, all my cards still work, I replied. Okay, then give me some money, he said. Why should I give you anything? I asked. Because I'm the one who advises you and helps you deal with it, he said. Face it, lady, I'm all you have right now. I have to admit that his advice seemed logical. In the days that followed, Fred became like my best friend. Well, like a friend who also had sex with me. Okay, a friend who had sex with me and constantly took money from me. We came up with a lot of ideas about what I could do to get Terry to forgive me. The problem was that nothing worked. Then the day came when things really went wrong. I was waiting for Fred to come and was afraid of having sex with him again when a car pulled up. A woman got out of the car. She was several years younger than me. She looked like a student. As I approached, I noticed that she was chewing gum. I remembered how often I chewed gum when I was studying. Hey, are you Brittany Stevens? She asked. I simply nodded. I don't believe it, she said. You look less than 30. I'm 30, I said, smiling. Do you want me to show you your license? Yes, she said, and loudly slammed her gum a couple of times. Your husband sent me to give you something, and you don't look old enough to be 30. The compliment, coupled with the fact that she said Terry had sent me something, confused me. It was so much like Terry. He always sent me flowers or invitations to lunch or dinner. The fact that he actually started communicating with me gave me hope that I could see light at the end of the tunnel. I took out my wallet and showed her my driver's license. Wow, great photo, she said. You really are Brittany Stevens. You are 30 years old, and you have received a subpoena, she said, handing me a folder of papers. She clicked her gum loudly and walked away. By the time I came to my senses and felt stupid for how she had tricked me, she was already back in the car and driving away. I stood there for a long time, clutching the folder. Tears flowed from my eyes against my will. The burning pain of tears surprised me. It's been a long time since I last cried. In fact, my entire marriage to Terry was one long period of happiness. I couldn't believe he wanted a divorce. It was just sex. This is not a reason for divorce. It's just a misunderstanding. We just saw things differently. During premarital counseling, we were warned not to let our differences drive us apart. If I had caught Terry in bed with his red-haired secretary, I wouldn't have divorced him. I would force him to fire her, but I would not get a divorce. Terry's secretary was so obviously in love with him that it was almost funny. Terry, like most men, was completely unaware of this. She was, I must admit, a really pretty woman and younger than me. But Terry was so in love with me that she could show up to work with no panties and a t-shirt that said, "Make love to me," and he wouldn't notice. The main reason I kept her around was because she was my cat. With her next to her, not a single mouse could get close to Terry. She watched him like a hawk to make sure none of the smart, sexy female engineers or young, curvy interns could get close to him. And now Terry wanted a divorce. How will I show up to my family and friends? I entered the house, leaving the door open. I was so caught up in my thoughts that I didn't hear Fred enter. "What's eating you?" he asked. I just picked up the folder. He grinned. "Well, I guess we knew it was coming," he muttered. "Well, here it is." "What is it?" I asked. "This is our chance to get revenge on him," he smiled. "We will make this divorce so difficult for him that he will back down." "Do you think I can get him back?" I asked. He simply smiled and nodded. "And if you can't bring him back, we'll take all his money," he said. "He will spend the rest of his life working for us." "What do you mean us?" I asked. I began to realize that maybe Fred wasn't my friend. I knew that he didn't love me. That's what he said. But at that moment, I wasn't even sure if he was on my side. "You need my help and my advice," he said. "And I don't work for free." "Why do I need your help?" I asked. "Because you're too emotional to handle it," he said. "You're not thinking clearly, and neither is he." Have you ever thought about on what grounds he wants to get a divorce? You and I are having sex. I cheated on him, I said. Don't ever say that again, he replied sharply. But it's true, I said. He simply shook his head. You fool, that's the law, he said with contempt. They don't care about the truth. The only thing they care about is what you can prove. Your husband caught us kissing. We'll both go to court and swear it was just a kiss. You achieved success in one of the exercises in your workout. We hugged each other in celebration of this success. The hug turned into a random kiss, which your husband stumbled upon. He has no evidence that anything else happened. He never saw or heard of us having sex. Is it really that simple? I asked. He simply nodded. He has two options, he said. He can file for divorce without finding fault, in which case you will divide everything in half, and you will probably be awarded alimony for a while, in addition to your share of the entire property. Or he may try to prove adultery, hoping that with the right judge you will be left with nothing. But he has no evidence, and we must do everything to prevent him from getting it. How do we do this? I asked. We need to be very careful from now on, he said. When we meet, we need to make sure no one sees us together. We also have to assume that he wiretapped your home phone. But it works to our advantage, because I never called your home phone. By that time, he was already pulling me towards the bedroom. But I don't want to have sex with you, I said. This is what caused all my problems. Don't be stupid, he said. You can't afford to make me angry. I'm the only person on your side in this situation. I am your only ally. It would be a disaster if you made me angry. Imagine the damage I could cause if I went over to his side. I can come to court and tell the truth. I can tell them that all my clients are women I sleep with. I can tell them how you couldn't resist me and how we had sex every time we met. I can tell you that we did it here, in his own bed, and that you gave me money. Trust me, the truth is not on your side. Now take off your clothes. But you have all these other women, I said. You can sleep with one of them. Most of them have already left, he said. Besides, you are the youngest of all my clients. You're the only one under 40. You haven't had children yet. As I already mentioned, regarding sex, the passion is gone. I realized what was missing. Our sex was just sex. Sex with Fred was just sex. He fell silent abruptly. Crap, he shouted and left the room. He put on his clothes right in the corridor. When I went out into the corridor, he was already fully dressed and talking on the phone in a very quiet voice. He looked at me like I was an idiot. Get dressed, he said. I have a friend who is coming now. What's happening? I asked. Your husband is not a fool, he said. I told you it was us versus him, right? I nodded. Well, he's definitely going all in. He does everything right. He didn't stop you from returning home. The court will look at this with sympathy. He didn't close your accounts, which was also the right move. The court will see him in a very positive light. I don't think he's going for a divorce without establishing guilt, he said. He's going all in. I thought you said he needed proof for this, I sobbed. You said he had no proof. I don't want a divorce. I want Terry back. You might have to resign yourself to taking his money, he said. I think he has proof. How? I asked. You said it was his word against ours. I think I saw one of those tiny cameras above the bed, he said. I didn't think he could act so quickly. He probably installed all this equipment while you were gone. He may already have all the evidence he needs. You might end up on the street. We sat on the porch and waited for his friend. He arrived shortly after that. It was a small, strange-looking guy in a souped-up Japanese car. It was one of those cars with a huge exhaust pipe at the back. These cars always made Terry laugh. He constantly said that the drivers of these cars watched Fast and the Furious. I still remember his grin as he passed one of these cars on the highway. What do you get if you put a huge exhaust pipe on a bad little car? He once asked me. I had no idea. Louder, but still a bad car, he replied, laughing. The noisy bad car guy got out and started walking around my house with a bunch of portable electronic devices. I really didn't like the way he looked at me. He came back to us, shaking his head. He motioned for us to be silent and go out onto the porch. I wanted to ask him what was going on, but he raised his hand to silence me. He scanned the porch and walked with us to the side of the road. "Fred, this place is equipped like NASA," he said. "I found at least 12 cameras, as well as bugs and microphones. The phone is also tapped. Judging by the frequencies, this is private detective equipment, and it is the latest." "What can you do?" asked Fred. "What do you want me to do?" the guy asked. "I can find and pull it all out. I can jam the signal, and I can even erase everything that has not yet been downloaded." "Now shut everything down and erase everything that wasn't sent," Fred ordered. "Can you afford me to do this?" the guy asked. "It will cost you $500. "Give the man $500, Fred told me. I looked at him in bewilderment. "It's much cheaper than giving your husband more evidence against you in court. Instead of a profitable divorce, think about the fact that you will have to return to your parents forever." I gave the guy the cash I had and wrote a check for the remaining amount. "From a legal point of view, jamming is a much better option," the guy said. "If this homeowner installed these devices, removing them could get you in jail." He returned to the house and got to work. "The video from last week has already been sent, so nothing can be done. I'm pretty sure this whole thing was installed before you left, so our meeting last week will probably already be used as evidence. The only thing we can do is try to reduce the evidence, but it doesn't look good. I need to think of something. This may take a couple of days. In the meantime, don't call me. When I have something, I will contact you. But if I were you, I would try to make peace with him. If you can get him into bed, that might help," Fred said. "How am I supposed to get him into bed?" I squealed. "I can't even get him to talk to me." Things only got worse over the next few days. I hired a lawyer. We made an appointment with Terry's lawyer. The meeting was unsuccessful. Lawyer Terry kept his cards close to his chest. He didn't boast about his evidence or even say whether he had it. But he had many trump cards in his business. He also made some powerful arguments. Among other things, he pointed out that we are very young. We have been married only 5 years, and we have no children. Based on the fact that I could still go to work, they tried to exclude child support. Terry also wanted to pay me half of our share of the house. Since we lived in it for only 3 years, this was a mere trifle. He also noted that without a source of income, I would not be able to pay the mortgage on my house alone. The worst part about it was that attending the meeting was part of my plan to get Terry to talk to me. But Terry didn't even show up to the meeting. He let his lawyer handle it. The lawyer said Terry was too broken by my betrayal to meet with me. He just wanted to move on with his life. I felt terrible. When I returned home after the meeting, Terry was already in the garage. I heard him cursing about several stuck bolts while trying to disassemble the car. Over the past few days, I've talked to my dad about what Terry was doing. He did something called a resto mod on a 1967 Mustang Fastback. Turns out my husband didn't like the look of the new 2015 Mustang, so he went back in time, found his dream car, and built one for himself. He was going to keep the original body style, but with a few changes and modifications to modernize it. The car's suspension, engine, exhaust system, and interior components will be completely updated. This will be a truly unique Mustang built to Terry's specifications. My father sounded like he was jealous. "Hey, Brittany, this is a great opportunity for you," my dad said. "This is a chance for you two to mend your relationship. You don't have to know anything about cars to take one of these apart. You can just hand him wrenches and tools. Just put on a cute outfit and go help him. This is a good chance for you two to talk about your problems." I changed into the skinny jean shorts that Terry always liked on me. I put on a top from which my breasts could easily fall out and went to the garage. I convinced myself that there was no need to be nervous. This was a man who loved me so much that he offered to spend his whole life with me. Of course, we had problems, but Terry was still the same person. When the door opened, I was sure he saw me. I noticed a lot of emotions on his face. I saw pain, anger, and even traces of the love he always showed me. He then turned away from me and went back to his work. "Do you need help?" I asked quietly. "No, thank you," he said. The words sounded like they were being torn from his throat. If he had felt for even a moment the pain I detected in his voice and had been able to express it in court, he would not only have gotten a divorce, but he would have sent me to prison. I stood there for a long time while he continued to work. Then I realized many things. I think it was in that terrible moment, listening to the pain in my husband's voice, that I truly matured. I was a spoiled little bitch, and I deserved what happened to me. For me, life was a game. It was all about being beautiful and getting what I wanted. Early in my life, my father and mother bought me these things. After I got married, Terry took over, and it became obvious that our life together was much more real for Terry than it had ever been for me. This was not a game for him. He loved me more than he could ever express in words. His world was destroyed when I did what I did. Now I feel terrible about everything. I would give anything to take back what happened. I also realized that even though I didn't act like it, I loved Terry much more than I thought I did. The very concept of living without him, or the thought of him being with someone else, caused me terrible pain. But I had no one to blame but myself. "Terry, can we talk?" I asked. "There's nothing to talk about," he said. "Terry, there's a lot to talk about," I said. "When did you start drinking strong alcohol?" "When the pain started, I thought this might help," he said. "There was nothing at CVS that would help the feeling of having your heart ripped out of your chest and trampled on by the one you love most in the world." His voice was so raw and full of emotion that it hit me like a fist. "So I just came home and drank until I passed out," he continued. "When I was unconscious, the pain went away." I tried to change the subject. I couldn't bear to hear any more about how much I had hurt a man who had literally done everything he could to show me his love since the moment we met. I felt the worst. They always say that when you are afraid or in danger, it is better to attack. So I did. I acted as if I had no doubt that Terry and I would get back together soon, and I was worried about our future and finances. "So why did you spend so much of our money on a machine that won't work for a long time?" I asked. "Because whiskey doesn't help anymore," he sang. I could tell from the tone and fake accent that it was one of those country songs he loved so much. These guys with names like Twitty and Travis and Billy Ray Bob were always singing about pickup trucks and getting their women back. "Terry, I'm sorry," I said. For the first time in my life, I wanted to beg someone to forgive me for what I had done. I put my whole heart into the apology. "Terry, I made a mistake. It was stupid, I was completely wrong, and it was only physical. I swear that nothing like this will ever happen again. Please forgive me." For a long time, the room was so quiet that you could hear the crickets singing outside. Terry then sighed. "I forgive you, Brittany," he said. I felt so good it was incredible. I smiled for the first time in days. I'm not sure if anyone can understand the meaning of a smile unless they've been through hell. But it seemed that simply forgiving my husband freed me from the darkest prison on earth. Although the sun was already setting, the whole world seemed brighter. My world started spinning again. I felt some of my confidence return just because of his words. "Terry, please don't stay here all night working on this thing," I said. "We haven't slept together for almost 2 weeks. Especially today, I would like you to be in bed with me at a decent time." He looked surprised, but I just waved my hand to him, closing the door. I danced up the stairs. I showered and perfumed my body with a scent that Terry adored. I put on the sexiest night dress I owned. Then I lay down in our bed and waited. I fell asleep still thinking about it. When I woke up the next morning, I was confused. I ran all over the house looking for Terry. He was nowhere to be found. I looked at my watch and realized that he had probably already left for work. I called his office and got through to his secretary, Christina. She sounded like she didn't want to talk to me. It also seemed like she didn't want him to talk to me. "This is a business number, Brittany," she said coldly. "I tell you all the time that you can't call here for personal matters." "Oh, I did it again," I said. But since I'm on the line, I'd like you to let me talk to him. So, I'm a genie in a bottle, she said. Do you want me to fulfill your wish? You're pissing me off, I told her. I just want to talk to my husband for a minute. What does a girl want? She began. And what she can get is not always the same thing. You're toxic, I said. I'll make Terry fire you. Great, she said and hung up. I tried to call Terry's cell phone, but he didn't answer. By the time he got home, I was angry. I wanted to know why he stayed in the garage working on this car for so long when I clearly asked him not to. I also wanted to know why he didn't wake me up when he finished playing with his car. And finally, I wanted to understand why he left for work without saying goodbye to me or kissing me goodbye. Brittany, you probably remember that this car is all I have now. If I'm not at work, I'll probably be working on it, he said. As for everything else, have you forgotten that we are getting a divorce? No way, I said. You have forgiven me. It's over. I want you to fire Christina. She may be a fighter, but it's just you and me until the end of the world. Brittany, I forgave you because it was the right thing to do so we could both move on. But that doesn't mean we're not getting divorced or that we're getting back together. But why? I howled. If you just give us a chance, we will become stronger. Brittany, I can never trust you again, he said. The way you disrespected and disregarded me shows that you never loved me the way I love you. I think divorce is the only way we can both be happy. We both deserve to be loved and to be with someone who will put us first. I was shocked. Without giving me another chance, his forgiveness meant nothing. I was so angry that I just turned and went back upstairs to the bedroom. I knew we needed to talk more, but at that moment I didn't have the words to express my thoughts. I couldn't believe he still wanted a divorce. I was also a little angry because I had opened my heart and begged him to forgive me, and it was like he just threw my apology in my face. No one has ever treated me like that. I spent the whole night in tears. The next morning, I thought of a few things I could say to him to convince him to give us another chance. I quickly jumped out of bed, only to find that he had left for work early again. I knew that Christina would never connect me with him, but Terry and I would definitely talk in the evening when he returned home. My anger at him running off to work again intensified. At 9 in the morning, my lawyer called. He wanted to talk about the agreement. Apparently, Terry and his lawyer wanted me to sign the papers so we could expedite the divorce process. My lawyer said Terry was even more upset now than before. Obviously, my conversations with him did not help. There was no point in putting pressure on him. I just made everything worse. At 10 in the morning, my mother called me in tears. It turned out that someone she knew at church had seen Terry walk into her lawyer's office, and people began speculating about our divorce. I knew that if the reasons for the divorce became known, my reputation would be greatly damaged. I needed a way to either stop the divorce or at least keep it a secret. At 10 o'clock, the courier left a parcel on my doorstep. I picked it up and opened it as it was addressed to me. Inside was a cheap mobile phone and a piece of paper with a number. I called the number and was surprised when Fred answered. He gave me the address. It was a car service. He said that I needed to take the car there for service. I went there, and as soon as they brought my car in, the service employee took me to a room behind the counter. Fred was there. We hit it, he said. Your husband is clearly not the type to forgive. He systematically gives back to us what we have given to each other. I just looked at him. At that moment, I hated Terry. Terry was clearly not the same man I married. I just didn't understand why he didn't want to give me another chance. I think at that moment I still saw the world as if everyone had to do exactly what I wanted. I still haven't realized that everyone in the world has feelings and rights, just like me. I don't have time for your riddles, I said. Speak clearly and simply, without riddles or metaphors. Just say what you mean. As I spoke, I had the idea that the reason Terry didn't want to forgive me was because he had already found someone else. The reason he doesn't want to have sex with me is because now he's having sex with her. No wonder he doesn't want me back so much. I know something about your divorce, Fred said. Your husband's lawyer is trying to get Judge Crockett to hear the case. I didn't have the slightest idea what that meant. Judge Sonny Crockett, he said. He used to be a vice detective in Miami. He fell in love with a local girl who was there on vacation. He left the police force and they moved here. He became a lawyer and was later elected as a judge. A few years ago, he caught his wife cheating. They never divorced. He once left the gate to the enclosure where his pet alligator, Elvis, was kept open. The alligator escaped and an accident occurred, his wife died. Crockett was found not guilty. He took several years off to relive this tragedy. So he still loved her even after she cheated on him? I asked. I grabbed a straw. I needed some proof that I could have hope. Hell no, Fred spat. He was mourning the loss of his pet, not his wife. The alligator had to be put down. You cannot keep an animal that has killed a person. Either way, since he's returned to work, he's been known to be very harsh on cheating spouses. They are usually left with nothing, or as close to it as he can get it. Since you've only been married 5 years, you might end up broke. This bastard even has a little rubber alligator hanging from his hammer. If we end up in his court, we're both screwed. I looked at him seriously. What's in it for you? I asked. Your husband is still chasing me, he said. He mentioned me in your divorce proceedings as a contributing factor. He is also suing me for alienation of affection, acting to promote marital discord, infliction of great emotional distress, and several other vexatious claims. Fred looked at me, and I realized that he was both angry and afraid. We were both mad at Terry. My kind and gentle husband loved me so much that he tried to burn the whole world with the embers of our dying marriage. It's a pity that he didn't realize that he killed himself. I still loved him. In fact, I loved him even more than before. Over the past 2 weeks, I've seen what it's like to live without him, and I hated. I think he even wants my brother fired, Fred said. Your husband is trying to burn everything down. If I get this on my file because you are my client, it will be very bad for me. I may lose my trainer certification. Then I'll never be able to work anywhere, especially in Michigan. I'm angry at him too, I said. I don't want to end up broke and homeless. I have a plan, he said, but we need to act quickly. As far as I understand, your divorce hearing will take place very soon. I'll do whatever it takes, I said. Even as I said this, I felt a chill run down my spine. What are we going to do? We have no choice, he said seriously. It's either us or him. We have to remove him. If we don't do this, you will end up as a city woman of easy virtue, and I will go down with you. And what do you mean remove it? I asked. I'll give him a little car accident, he said. Nothing serious, but he will need a lot of time to recover. This will delay the trial for a long time. During this time, you must be his nurse and regain his favor so that he cancels the divorce. He will be completely dependent on you. You'll have a few months to convince him that you're truly sorry and get him back. Can you handle it? Oh yes, I said. I will get my man back. You do your part, and I'll do mine. Just don't screw it up. I need him to suffer enough that he won't just leave his damn secretary to take care of him. Don't worry about my part, he snapped. I have a professional on my side. Just make sure you can get him back. I will do everything real and unreal, I said. He will be like clay in my hands. He looked skeptical. What's wrong? I asked. Well, you're not very successful when it comes to sex, he said. As I left the garage, I pretended to inspect my car to make sure everything was okay. I talked to the station owner outside in case Terry had hired a private investigator to watch me. Fred told me that it is common to hire a private investigator to gather evidence during a divorce. That night, I tried to talk to Terry again. I cooked his favorite dish again. This time, I took it to the garage. I brought him a plate completely naked. He looked up and saw me holding a plate. I stood holding a plate. What do you want to eat more of? I asked. Terry didn't react the way I expected. I saw tears run down his face, and he threw the wrench across the garage. He broke one of the lamps. He began to sob uncontrollably. In all the time we were together, Terry was always like a stone wall. This was the first time I saw him cry. "I love you so much," he sobbed. "Why did you do this to us? Was it worth it?" He ran out of the garage. A few minutes later, I heard his Mustang drive off into the night. Even during his outburst of emotions, I saw only love in his eyes. No matter how angry he got, he would never hurt me. I burst into tears too. I was angry at myself for what I had just done. It felt terrible to tease a man who loved me so much and was just trying to find a way out of his feelings for me. Even what he did to Fred was just revenge for what Fred and I did. I should have been flattered that someone loved and valued me so much that they would try to ruin another person's life for taking me away from them. But Terry was wrong. I was wrong. I slept with another man several times. I became a victim of desire. I will never give in to this again. No one can take me away from Terry. We belong to each other. His car returned around midnight. I decided not to try to talk to him that night. I decided to give him some space and peace. I've already given him enough. This may not be something we can fix alone. I decided to try to find a family consultant who could help us. Maybe I can convince Terry to go for it. That night, I dreamed about us going through counseling. I saw us arguing and shouting at each other. I saw how we gradually became closer to each other. I've seen us put off divorce and then put it on hold. I saw months of us tiptoeing around each other. For the first time, I saw myself putting as much effort into our marriage as Terry always did. I saw us argue and forgive each other again and again. I saw timid attempts to simply touch each other. I saw careful hugs that made me so happy that I was ready to break. After all, I saw sex. It became more and more regular until one morning I just realized I was pregnant. Our child brought a new level of commitment to our union. However, I still felt uncertain. There was uncertainty on my part. I had to be sure that Terry would never have any reason to doubt my feelings. To fully win my husband back, I had to continually show him that there would never be a reason to doubt my love for him again. But things didn't turn out the way I expected. Our son was 10 years old in the dream. Terry and I were renewing our wedding vows, and Fred showed up at the ceremony. He had no idea who the hero of the occasion was. He came over to congratulate us both, but as soon as Terry saw him, he reacted. "Terry Nuo!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. I woke up and realized that I had slept longer than usual. It was a dream, but my scream was real. And I realized that the reason I screamed had nothing to do with sleep. I screamed because I was in mortal fear for my husband. I quickly dialed Fred's number. I needed to tell him not to do anything. I didn't want Terry to get hurt. In fact, after my misplaced anger from yesterday had passed, I couldn't bear the thought of Terry getting hurt. "You stupid bitch," he shouted. "I told you not to call me on that damn phone." "Don't do this," I shouted, interrupting his protests. "It's too late," he said. "He'll be fine. Just do your part and stick to the plan." I called Terry at work. His stupid secretary was worried too. Fred hasn't arrived yet. I begged her to call me as soon as he got there. I walked around the room and again tried to call his mobile phone. He hated answering calls while driving, but I didn't care. However, there was no answer. The call immediately went to voicemail. A little after noon, someone knocked on the door. I opened the door and saw the last person I expected to see. It was Terry's older brother, Ray. I was always surprised that Ray Stevens became a policeman. Terry told me stories about his crazy brother in his youth. Ray had a tendency to show up at large public events and run through them naked. He was such a fast runner that he could never be caught. He even had a nickname. Oh yes, they called him Streak, the fastest creature on two legs. However, standing there with his head down, Ray didn't look like Streak. "Brittany, I always warned him about that damn car," he said. Before he could say another word, I grabbed my purse. "Ah, we have no time to waste, Ray," I said. "Which hospital is he in?" "Brittany, what does divorce have to do with it?" I screamed. "He's still my husband now. I have the right to be in the hospital, and I will destroy this damn machine. I might go to a Ford dealership and trash every Mustang on the lot so he can't buy another one. Now let's go. Brittany, he said softly. He took my hands and pressed me to my sides. He sat me down on the sofa and hugged me. Brittany, Terry didn't make it, honey. My brother is dead. This is the last thing I remember. My vision from the sides narrowed to complete darkness. When I woke up, Ray was standing over me. He looked very worried. He was holding the phone to his ear and talking to someone. His eyes met mine and the conversation stopped. You can cancel the ambulance, he said. She finally woke up. I'll talk to her a little, and if she needs to go to the hospital, I'll take her myself. He turned to me again. You scared me to death, he said. Then I remembered again what happened and started crying. For a long time, Ray just let me cry. Let it all out, Brittany, he said. Once you get stronger, I'm sorry I have to do this, but we need to go to the accident scene. I want to see him, I stammered. I could barely keep my voice stable enough to say words. I was racked with guilt and deep sadness. I couldn't believe that my husband was dead. It was so sudden. At the same time, I wanted to kill Fred. That bastard promised me that Terry wouldn't get hurt. He promised that Terry would not be seriously harmed. I needed to see him for myself. My mind just couldn't accept the idea that Terry was no longer alive. I was sure there was a mistake. I needed to see him. I stood up, feeling amazingly weak. I was scared, but at the same time, a strong desire burned within me to see him. I got into the police car with Ray. We drove about 3 miles to the highway entrance. My subconscious recognized the only rival for Terry's heart before this realization entered my brain. I started screaming, not even understanding what I was looking at. Although I never admitted it, she was once amazingly beautiful because of her jealousy. Of course, this was Terry's dream. It started life as a regular 2014 Mustang GT. Terry replaced almost everything on the car. He started with the engine before he even got behind the wheel. He completely disassembled it, adding forged internal parts that were much stronger and more reliable than the originals. These extra boosts were necessary because he added a Roush supercharger to the engine, which increased the car's power by 100+ horsepower. He installed a more efficient fuel pump and low-range pulleys. He also beefed up the cooling system and fans because all that extra power generated a lot more heat, too. He then literally replaced everything except the body panels and modified some of them, too. The radiator grills and headlights were darkened. The same was done with the rims and taillights. The windows were tinted to the darkest acceptable shade. He replaced the spoiler with a larger, more aggressive one and added a very aggressive splitter to the front of the car. Almost everything in the car was black, with the exception of 2 greenish-yellow fog lights, which were designed to look like cat's eyes. The car looked like a big, angry black cat, a cat that purred to the mechanical symphonic rhythm of pistons and camshafts. When Terry pressed the gas pedal, that purr turned into a roar. But the big black cat is no longer snarling. I cried again, looking at the twisted and crumpled pieces of metal and plastic. Firefighters were still there, trying to make sure the fire didn't reignite. It seemed as if the entire car had once been engulfed in flames. How could anyone survive this? I asked out loud. I think I said it a lot louder than I expected. No one survived, Ray said sadly. Brittany, besides you, only Terry knew this car better than anyone else. Is this his car? Those glowing yellow-greenish headlights, although damaged beyond repair, were still there in the darkened grille. Although burned beyond recognition, his large aftermarket black rims, at least one of them, were intact enough for me to recognize him. I've never seen a Mustang with modifications like Terry's. It was one of those things that people loved. There are more aftermarket parts available to modify Mustangs than any other vehicle on the planet. Part of this is due to the fact that the Mustang is one of the few cars that has been produced continuously for 50 years. No other muscle car can boast this. Another reason is simple. The Mustang, as an American car, attracts people from all walks of life and age groups. And each of these Mustang owners wants to make their car unique and different from all the others. Another factor is that, unlike some cars, There is a Mustang for everyone. A poor or hard-pressed person can buy a used V6 for just a few $1,000s. A rich and successful person buys a high-end Shelby or even a rare classic. At the end of the day, they both still drive Mustangs, and the people who love them both. Yes, I managed. I recognize those headlights and rims. I almost collapsed saying this. "Thank you, honey," Ray said. "I'll be right back." He went to another man at the scene and began talking to him. While Ray was talking, two people walked past, discussing something with each other. The body was completely burned. "The airbags didn't deploy," said another. "It's strange that there are no signs of braking," said the first one. "Once the car is removed, no one will be able to say there was an accident." "Dude, those are Brembo brakes," said another. "The rotors and calipers were probably about $8,000. It wasn't an accident. I think someone messed with his brakes." I lost consciousness again, and as I was told, I was taken to the hospital for observation. The next few days passed in a blur. I think they kept me under sedatives out of fear for my emotional state. I vaguely remember the cremation ceremony. I wasn't able to make decisions. Luckily, Ray was there to help me through it all. This morning I woke up and stared at the large, ornate vase that held Terry's ashes. This was the first day that I was left alone in the house since. I started crying again. I didn't know how I should continue living without him. Terry was my rock, he was my heart, and now he is gone. He was gone, and I was at least partially to blame for it. I had to pay for my role in his death, and Fred had to pay too. I seriously thought about confessing everything, but self-preservation outweighed my honesty. Besides, Terry can't be brought back. My arrest won't bring him back. Arresting Fred won't bring him back either. The phone rang and I picked it up, expecting it to be Ray or one of our friends. "Hey baby, we need to talk," he said. "Remember that the house is bugged, so go outside and call me back on the phone I gave you." Why didn't I notice before how much Fred's voice sounded like a snake? I did as he wanted because I needed to let that bastard know how I felt about him. "You lied to me, you bastard," I screamed. "You said he wouldn't get seriously hurt." "Baby, it was a mistake," he said. "You should be in jail," I screamed. "You're a killer." "You're a killer too, baby," he said. "You need to calm down because this is not the end. There's an investigation going on, and if I go to jail, you'll go to jail too. We need to calm you down so you can do what you need to do." "So what should I do now?" I asked. "You need to apply for insurance, give me half the money, and then we need to get out of here until the investigation is completed. You need to calm down." The next morning, when Ray came to check on me, we sat down for a cup of coffee. While we were talking, someone knocked on the door. Ray went to open it. I followed him. Fred was standing in the doorway. Luckily, Ray had never seen him before. He looked at him suspiciously until Fred extended his hand and introduced himself as my cousin Fred. He apologized to his mother, my aunt, who could not come, and said that he would stay with me for a few days until I regained my strength. Ray immediately warmed up to him. Fred's plan was working. Without a job, Fred couldn't pay rent or anything else. He always counted on me to give him money, just like I did before Terry's accident. Neither he nor I could have predicted that I would only have access to family accounts. Everything else was blocked until Terry's estate was settled. "I missed the sex," Fred said as soon as Ray left. I had neither the motivation nor the strength to push him away. I just sat on the couch for the rest of the day. I didn't eat or do anything. When it got dark, I heard a voice. I was sure it was Terry. I turned to see Fred looking at me with a smirk. "Time to sleep," he smiled. It was the worst sex of my life. The main reason I didn't resist was that I didn't want to be alone. To be honest, I was scared. I could still feel Terry's presence throughout the house. Over the first few days, Fred toured the house. "Damn, this is a good place," he said. "If everything had been different, I probably would have stayed here longer. But I have to say that something is wrong here. It's like your husband is still around somewhere, watching us." I looked at him like he was crazy. He acted as if we were on some kind of twisted honeymoon. I didn't understand what made him think that I wanted some kind of future with the man who killed my husband. It was a terrible situation. During the day, we hardly spoke. He was talking on the phone all the time. I was racked with guilt. I spent time looking at albums of photographs of Terry and me during our marriage. At night, we were united by different needs. I, as before, was afraid to be alone. Fred, on the other hand, only wanted sex. We both knew that as soon as the insurance money came in, we would go our separate ways. On the third day that Fred was with me, it happened. It happened just after dusk when I heard a crash in the living room and the sound of glass breaking. I rushed down the stairs to the living room, ready to give Fred a beating. Since I've had him, I've always yelled at him for touching Terry's things. I locked the garage door so he couldn't even look at the collection of parts Terry had been working on in the last days of his life. When I entered the living room, Fred was standing against the wall. He was white as chalk. "What's wrong with you?" I screamed. "What have you broken now?" He turned and looked at me. His eyes didn't blink. "I saw him," he said in a trembling voice. "He was standing right here." There was no need to explain who he was talking about. I immediately understood who he was. "He was standing right here," he repeated. "He looked at me as if he wanted to kill me." I felt waves of hatred and anger emanating from him. Fred's teeth chattered and he trembled. I asked him to describe what he saw. When he finished, I asked him to tell it all again. For the first time that I can remember, we went to bed together and didn't have sex. The next night, it was even worse, and I was part of it. We went out to eat at McDonald's since I refused to cook for Fred. We ate and watched TV. We've been together constantly since Fred saw what he saw. Suddenly, we heard the sound of an engine roaring in my driveway. I was sure it was the sound of Terry's Mustang. I've heard it enough times to distinguish this exhaust note from any other. I looked out the window, but didn't see anything. Fred ran outside and walked around the yard. There were no hidden speakers or anything like that anywhere on the lawn or porch. When we returned to the house, we were already arguing. "It was Mustang Terry," I sobbed. "But it was destroyed. I saw it myself." "It could have been anyone," Fred said. As we closed the door behind us, I turned around to yell at Fred and noticed that his eyes were huge. I turned around and saw him myself. Terry stood behind me. He was looking for something. Then he looked up and saw us. His mouth opened as if he was trying to say something, but nothing came out. His face contorted with rage, and I heard the words. The voice was distorted and full of anger. "Get out of my house," he said. There was not a trace of love for me in his eyes. The only emotions I saw were anger and hatred. Fred and I both ran out of the house. We sat on the side of the road for over an hour before we got up the courage to go back inside. Fred demanded that I go into the bathroom with him so he could shower. During an encounter with Terry's ghost, he peed himself. That night, we got on the internet and started looking for factual information about ghosts and apparitions. Most of what we found was contradictory and just seemed crazy. Each article seemed to say different things about the spirits of the dead. The only thing they all agreed on was that ghosts are the spirits of people who have died, leaving something unfinished or in need of resolution. This description fit Terry very well. Fred and I were afraid to be in the house. We clung to each other to find courage in our shared fear. We decided that one of us would stay awake while the other slept. We had to change every 2 hours. In fact, now that I had gotten over the shock, I wanted to see Terry again. I wanted to apologize to him for everything I did. Fred made another one of his phone calls while I was trying to sleep. I didn't hear what was said, but after the conversation his mood improved. So much so that he started pestering me. I turned away and fell asleep. "Fuck you," he said. "Isn't that what you were trying to do?" I asked. "As soon as we get the money, I'll leave," he said. "You will deal with your ghost yourself." Terry. I laughed heartily when I sat down. I looked around the small space I had rented and looked at the arsenal of lasers and other equipment we had installed. "It's so good to hear you laugh again," said a voice next to me. Hearing these words, I nodded and then remembered how I got to this point. I think it all started about a month ago when the scales fell from my eyes. I discovered many things about the woman I married. Most of what I realized was unpleasant. I also finally realized how much of a fool I had been towards her. I think I could describe the last 5 years as fat and happy. For those who have trouble spelling, fat and happy is spelled Tupoy. I fell in love with Brittany without realizing that we were the same and at the same time very different. I loved Brittany with all my heart and soul. I really enjoyed busting my ass to give her things. The problem was that I never noticed that Brittany didn't love me the same way. Brittany seemed to only love that I loved her. And because I loved her almost as much as she loved herself, we belonged to each other. We spent 5 years locked in our mutual love for her. I considered her the person I love more than anything in the world. I would gladly sacrifice my life for her. She treated me with the same level of care and affection that one would show to a puppy or other beloved pet. She was very kind to me. She made sure I had everything I needed to be happy. Our life together was very joyful. We even had, as I thought, a very intense sex life. We made all the plans that ordinary couples make. We even discussed when we would start having perfect children, as Brittany said. However, as they say, man proposes, God disposes. Until recently, this year was both up and down for me. It was filled with uplifting highs and absolutely dismal lows, but through it all, I had Brittany. Like my heart, my soul, and my anchor, Brittany was there to lift me up during the tough times and keep me grounded when I was at my best. The highlight of my life was receiving an engineering award and being recognized at a ceremony hosted by my company. The low point I thought until recently was seeing the 2015 Mustang, or what Ford called the new Mustang. I really liked what they were trying to do. I really liked the rear of the car. I don't think the sides bother me too much. I understand the logic behind the engine choices, although for us purists nothing will ever beat a V8. The independent rear suspension, along with the improved handling, makes me delighted. But then they disappointed us by making the front end of the car the same as the damn Fusion. Don't get me wrong, the Fusion is a good car, but I wouldn't put a horse on it and call it a Mustang. In general, immediately after the ceremony, Brittany began to behave strangely. I decided to keep an eye on her to figure out what was going on. When a woman suddenly makes major changes in her life, there is a reason for it. Brittany, who hadn't done any training since she quit cheerleading, made me suspicious. So one day, I used my lunch break to go and watch her at the sports club she had joined. Several of my friends have told me that when a woman reaches 30, she changes. I knew that Brittany's appearance was an important part of her self-perception. I thought that was why she suddenly wanted to train. She didn't even try to hide what she was doing. I walked into a large gym full of exercise equipment and saw my wife making out with the same giant steroid jock I saw her talking to at my awards ceremony. It was obvious from the way they kissed that they did more than that. To say that my heart was broken would be an understatement, but they were both adults and neither of them seemed to care about anything but each other. I loved Brittany with all my heart. If this guy had attacked her or tried to force himself on her, I would probably be dead or in jail right now because I would have given my life or taken his to save her. However, it was clear that Brittany gave him as much as she received. I was ready to fight for Brittany to my last breath, but I would never humiliate myself by fighting for her. I also had no intention of funding her infidelity. The club manager was very helpful. He returned the full amount to me and promised to look into the matter. When we agreed on the refund amount, I reminded him that I had not actually paid the full price. I received a discount through my company's health plan. His eyes widened when I told him what company I worked for. I went back to work as if nothing had happened. As usual, when I had a problem, I locked myself in my office and worked. Work was a great way for me to think. That afternoon, I decided, as usual, to give Brittany what she wanted. I mean, she obviously wanted that hunk on steroids. Who am I to stand in the way of true love? Even in my 30s, I have to admit that I was not a big party animal. I wasn't a Walker, a Lothario, a Casanova, or any of these other smooth European lovers. I was no expert on women or the art and science of love. Although I had several relationships in college and before, Brittany was my first and only true love. So, faced with Brittany's betrayal, I turned to what I knew. I looked at our marriage like designing and manufacturing a car or any modern engineering project. I broke the situation down into its individual components and assigned different levels of urgency and importance to the different components. First, I needed to stabilize my emotions. The best way for me to do this is to isolate myself from the source of my pain while I try to recover. This meant that I needed to get away from Brittany for a while. I think it was like Brittany was a disease in a third world country. The first step that doctors took was to remove the patient from the conditions that allowed him to become infected. They did this by taking the person to the hospital. They could then begin treatment without the risk of reinfection before he had developed immunity against the disease. So that night when I got home, I avoided Brittany like the plague. Initially, I decided to tell her to get the hell out of my house. It seemed to me that she could go and live with the steroid barbarian. Now she was his. She wanted him, she could have him. On the other hand, he could have it, but I couldn't do it. So I pressed pause. I went for a run and thought about the problem while wearing out your sneakers. I learned a lot during those 40 minutes of running. I realized that there are a variety of instruments in an orchestra. Usually when I listen to music, I listen to guitar riffs. It makes sense because I used to play guitar. However, during those 40 minutes, I realized that not everything has to be visible and in your face like a spectacular guitar riff. I also realized that Myron Grombacher is God. Myron Grombacher, Pat Benatar's drummer. And I mean drummer with a capital D, because everyone knows that there are drummers and there are drummers. A drummer is like a metronome or a track. He keeps the rhythm, no more and no less. He makes sure that all the other instruments stay on time. However, the drummer really adds something to the song. He is so much a part of the music that without him, the song loses its meaning. While I ran, I listened to my usual eclectic mix of rock, pop, country, classical, and metal. I found myself scrolling through some of Pat Benatar's later albums and remembered watching some of her videos on YouTube. Myron Grombacher is the first and only drummer I remember who played standing up, and as I listened to the music, I realized that I didn't have to get in Britney's face to get my point across. If she wanted a man to dominate her, maybe that's why she needed Captain Steroid, but I wasn't that man. Perhaps this is the case. Perhaps we just grew apart. Perhaps she was not wrong in what she did. Perhaps the only mistake was the way she did it. Perhaps in many years we can meet and talk about this. I really hoped so. But at that moment, it was not what I needed. Throughout our life together, like any good husband, I put Brittany's needs first. However, in this situation, I needed to be a little selfish and take care of my own needs and my own pain. My greatest need was to be free from pain, and Brittany was the source of my pain. For the first time since we met, my pain became stronger than my love. But after taking a lesson from Myron, I decided to be less confrontational. So instead of rushing in and beating my chest, I waited for her to come to me. And then I, without raising my voice, suggested that she spend some time with her parents because we need, or I need, some space. It worked. With Brittany leaving, I was able to further structure my problem. I needed to decide if what she did was so bad that we couldn't stay together anymore. I needed to get rid of the pain I was feeling, and I needed to decide what to do after making the decision. If we couldn't stay together, it would be pretty easy. We would get divorced. If we still stayed together, it would be even worse. I needed to figure out whether to just forgive her with a stern warning, go to counseling, or set up some kind of prenuptial agreement with strict sanctions in case she ever did it again. Getting rid of the pain turned out to be more difficult than I thought. It's like having a headache. You can't just think, stop being sick. It usually takes a combination of time and something to dull the pain while it lasts. Although I've never been a heavy drinker, during those first few days, I got drunk every night and felt terrible every day, trying to recover from the previous one. A couple of days later, I arrived at work to find my secretary, Christina, in emergency mode. "What did she do?" she asked. It was the first time she said anything bad about Brittany, but I realized that it was the first time she didn't love my wife. "I don't want to talk about it," I said. "It's personal." "I'm human," she snapped. Then she turned on one heel and went to get a cup of coffee for me. Setting the cup down, she looked at me. "I'm giving it to her once, but if she hurts you again." I saw her green eyes change color with anger. Christina was always cheerful and always lifted my spirits and made me feel like everything we were doing was great. If a supplier was unhappy with a change we made, Christina was convinced they were fools because we were perfect. That little conversation with Christina made me realize that the way I was treating my Brittany problem was not working for me. "Christy," I said quietly. Her eyes sparkled because, without understanding the details of the situation, I had crossed the line. "This is the first time you've used anything other than my full name," she said. "I'm sorry," I began. "Don't," she said sharply. "I liked it. Now what do you want?" "I was just wondering, you've always been so cheerful. What do you do when you're sad?" "I'm talking to you," she answered quietly. Her small smile after that warmed my broken heart. I was so busy with thoughts and plans that I almost forgot about lunch. Christina brought pizza from Domino's. My thoughts continued to spin in the same circle. I loved Brittany with all my heart. Until recently, I truly believed that she felt the same way. However, the evidence did not appear to support this. During our relationship, I met many attractive women, but none of them caught my attention. I think I was so in love with Brittany that other women just didn't notice. Apparently, Brittany didn't feel the same way. I have no way of knowing if this was the first time she cheated on me or if she did it all the time. The main red flag for me was that she was even capable of doing this. I couldn't handle it. The thought of having sex with another woman seemed foreign to me. I knew it would hurt Brittany, so I felt bad just thinking about it. Not only could Brittany do it, she did it. So in my mind, she just didn't love me the way I loved her. I think that in modern society, the concepts of love and sex are not always connected. But for me, they are still connected. There was also the issue of trust. How the hell could I ever trust her again? And if I couldn't trust her, how could we be married? I hated the thought of running around and trying to keep track of her every second of every day. It would just exhaust me. I'd be better off alone. Just starting to wonder how my life would be different as a single divorcee, Christina returned to my office. She threw the magazine on my table. "Pack the car," she said. The tone in which she said this sounded like a challenge. "Instead of drinking yourself to death, do something constructive." "What?" I asked. "You don't like the new Mustang, so build the old one." In the magazine she abandoned, there were several advertisements for the sale of old Mustangs. The one that really caught my attention was the '67 Fastback. Even looking at the car in its current, less-than-ideal condition, I began to imagine what capabilities it had. This was the moment I stopped imitating the alcoholic and started designing my own modifications for the car. I threw myself into it, and it helped. The next thing I did was start looking for a lawyer. I realized while she was away that things would never be the same between Brittany and me. I realized that it would be better if I started over. I thought we'd both be happier in the end. I met with the lawyer several times before he drafted the paperwork. He described to me all the pros and cons of the divorce procedure. He also wanted me to give myself time before making a final decision. The day Brittany left to be with her parents, 67, arrived. My imitation of an alcoholic stopped. At first, I thought it was a good thing Brittany didn't notice I was drinking so much. At that moment, I realized that if she really cared about me, she would have noticed. I worked on the car almost all night every night. I bought so much alcohol that I drank a little every now and then, but it was nothing like those first 2 nights when I ignored Brittany. A couple of days after Brittany left, I had a visitor. My father-in-law came to see me. He wanted me to believe that he was just passing by. However, it's hard to just drive by when you live 3 hours away by car. It didn't matter. I loved my father-in-law. We spent a pleasant few hours talking. He was amazed by my plans for 67. I can talk about cars with anyone, so talking about my car with someone I both respected and liked was really fun. At some point in our conversation, we talked a little about the breakup between me and Brittany. I didn't tell him the reason for our problems. I thought it was Brittany's cross to bear since she caused the problems. But I think he realized that since I was the one who needed to get away from her for a while, then she was the one who screwed up. I also think it didn't take him long to figure out what went wrong. And sure enough, a couple of days after our conversation, I returned home to find that Brittany was back. I didn't tell her she could come back, but according to my lawyer, I had no right to kick her out of our house. That day, I gave my lawyer permission to print the documents and hand them over. My lawyer also suggested hiring a good private investigator. I had to tell him that I was ahead of him on this matter. I have already hired a private investigator to equip the house with several cameras and a system that would record everything that happens in the house. My detective assured me that I would have enough evidence, and I needed it. My lawyer was able to get my case assigned to a judge who was very sensitive to the needs of people who had been victims of infidelity. The problem was that I didn't have any proof, and no matter how much Brittany claimed that she loved me, I was sure that she would not just go to court and admit everything. Every time Brittany and I spoke, she refused to even discuss divorce. I've tried everything. I proposed to her. But she was simply not ready to give up. I didn't want to do this, but I asked the detective to turn on the CCTV a couple of days after Brittany returned. Although I owned the house and had every right to install a CCTV system, Brittany could also, under the law of marriage, be considered the owner of the property and therefore had a legal right to expect a certain level of privacy. Therefore, despite what is shown on TV, it is not always possible to arrange surveillance of your own home. There are also cases where, even if you succeed, some judges simply will not allow the use of the data obtained. It was a legal gray area. My solution was to lie a little. I turned on the CCTV and 2 days later, I told Brittany that I had installed a security system. I could always fake the dates. Brittany just smiled at me, and she said it was good that I was concerned about her safety. This made me realize that she, somehow, already knew about the system. The day after I returned home, I went into the office and looked at what I had received for the 3 days that the system was active. I had nothing, and I mean literally nothing. There must have been at least several hours of footage of empty rooms and footage of Brittany and I walking around the house. But there was only static on the screen. There was nothing even on the audio recordings. The private investigator concluded that either the system was improperly installed or there was some natural radio frequency interference in the home or surrounding area. He also told me that it was possible that Brittany had someone working for her and created some kind of electronic jamming field that was distorting the recording. So there was a stalemate between me and Brittany. I couldn't really go to court without evidence, and Brittany couldn't convince me to give up the divorce. The bad news was that although she always told me it wouldn't happen again, she never admitted to having sex with the guy. If I had gone to court with what I had at the time, all I could have said was that I saw her kissing a guy. According to my lawyers, with that kind of evidence, we would probably end up in counseling for 6 months and then have to start all over again. My lawyer has decided, with my permission, to go after this steroid king. We thought that if we brought a lot of charges against him, he would convince Brittany to go to peace to take the pressure off himself. We thought that if we put pressure on him, he would put pressure on Brittany. It would also prove that they are still in touch. In meetings between my lawyer and Brittany's lawyer, we always spoke as if we had a lot of evidence. In short, we were bluffing. We didn't actually have any video or audio, but they didn't need to know that. In the days that followed, I tried to keep my contact with Brittany to a minimum. However, it was difficult. I spent most of my time in the garage working on the 67. I had already removed most of the chrome parts and started removing as much of the bodywork as possible. I was going to strip the car down to the frame and check for damage and rust. I was going to strengthen the frame for better handling by adding extra connections in all the critical areas. Next, I was going to powder coat the frame and begin the restoration. Brittany started trying to talk to me as often as possible. She also did everything to tease me. I felt that her antics in this regard were below the belt because I still could not forget her. But as often happens, things took a strange turn just when we thought we were settling into the long game. I was determined to get a divorce, and Brittany fought tooth and nail for our marriage. For some reason, she seemed to believe that everyone was allowed to cheat once or twice. She continued to give me absolutely ridiculous statistics about marriages surviving infidelity. She also made a list of all the couples we knew who were happy despite one or both partners cheating. The morning our impasse was broken seemed just like any other morning. I got up early and went to work much earlier than usual to avoid Brittany. As I stepped into the driveway, briefcase in hand, I smiled. That's what my car meant to me. It was one of those things that only car enthusiasts can understand. Every time I saw this car, I smiled, and then I noticed it. If I had matte black wheels, I would never have noticed this. However, my rims were a very glossy black color, so I spotted the smear from 5 feet. I thought it was just road dust, or maybe even brake dust, but as I got closer, I noticed something that shouldn't be there. There were 2 drops of fluid near my front left tire. I started the car like I always do and drove slowly down the street and around the block. I pulled into a parking lot at a shopping center around the corner from my house. I was driving no more than 10 miles an hour, so I barely made it to the rise in the parking lot. In the parking lot, I made a huge curve until the car stopped. As I expected, the brake pedal sank all the way to the floor. I made 2 calls. The first was to Brother Ray. I told him what I suspected and what I had done. He said that he would come right away. My second call was to Christina. I told her I would probably be late for work this morning. When my brother arrived and we talked, he said that calling Christina might have been a mistake. "We don't know who allegedly did it," he said. "You might have accidentally told the suspect that we suspected him. We don't know what his motives are. Christina might be mad at you for not giving her a raise. Hell, you might have forgotten about her birthday or not noticed new hairstyle. You can't just give out information. You can't trust anyone until they're ruled out as suspects. Everyone's a suspect." "Damn," I said. "I probably shouldn't have called you either. Mom always loved me more. Maybe you're jealous of me." "Ha ha, bastard," he said. He looked at my car and shook his head. He walked around the car completely. "There's not a single scratch on it. Why do you think someone damaged it?" I just looked at him. He picked up the phone and called someone named Bert. He told Bert to come here quickly and gave him the address. We went to a diner and had breakfast while we waited. About half an hour later, an old pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Ray and I walked out to the truck. As soon as I saw the truck and realized how raised it was off the ground, I had an idea of who Bert was. I imagined Yosemite Sam with a huge mustache, but I was wrong. Bert turned out to be a woman. And what a woman! Bert, short for Robert, was 4 feet 11 inches tall, with red hair, long legs, and huge breasts for her height. Ray pointed to my car, and she walked towards it. The word "went" doesn't do a strong enough job of describing what she did. When she approached the car, she walked around it in a complete circle. "He thinks—" Ray began. Bert quickly raised her tiny hand to silence him. "I've been thinking," she said. Her obvious southern accent contrasted with the high pitch and raspy quality of her voice. "There's nothing wrong with this car," she said, "except that the owner is most likely one of those gothic types. Everything on this car is black. It probably just ran out of gas." She pronounced the word gasoline as if it had 2 syllables and sounded like petrol. As I listened to her, I looked at what she probably called her petrol and fell in love with her. Everything she said made me think I could smell the magnolia trees in bloom. "Bert, this is my brother Terry," Ray said sharply. "It's his car, and he thinks his brake lines were cut." She looked at me and walked around me, just like the car. "Do you live in this parking lot?" she asked. "No, I don't live," I said. Without realizing it, I began to sound like her. She raised one eyebrow, and my brother started laughing. I opened the door and started the engine. She tried the brakes and noticed that there was no pressure in the brakes. "How the hell did you get here in one piece?" she asked. I noticed that when she was professional, her accent almost disappeared. That is, of course, assuming your brakes were actually damaged. I drove slowly, used the lean to lose some momentum, and made a big circle with my foot on the brake. When I slowed down enough, I just jerked the steering wheel into a sharp turn, and as soon as the engine died, I put the car in park, I said. "Are you sure something isn't just broken?" she asked. "Who made your brakes? Wasn't it one of those quick shops?" "I made my own brakes," I said. "They were fine." "Let's lift the car and take a look," she chuckled. "Maybe you're missing something. I'm a certified auto mechanic. I work with the police to investigate damage to cars and, of course, illegal modifications." I was a little nervous since my ex-pipe wasn't technically legal in Michigan, but I wanted to see what she had to say about my brakes, so I took my jack and lifted the front of the car. We removed the front left wheel. We then placed the jack stand she brought on the truck under the jacking point on the frame. "Damn it," she said. "Huge six-piston Brembo calipers, vented and cross-drilled rotors, and braided stainless brake lines. None of this is a factory. And look, your brake lines have actually been cut. See that straight, sharp cut? When the stainless ones break, which almost never doesn't happen, they either wear away in some area from rubbing against something, or they tear, making their edges uneven. Are you a mechanic or something?" she asked. I looked into her clear blue eyes as she looked at me. "Or something like that," I said. "He's an automotive engineer," Ray explained. "Ooh," Bert said, looking up at me. "Why didn't you tell me this right away?" Ray pushed me to get between us. "Okay, Terry, this is an official investigation now," he said. "I'm going to bring them both in for questioning." "That's not a good idea," I said. He just looked at me. "I'm a trained police officer here," he said. "If we let them know we suspect them of trying to kill you, they won't try again. But if we let them think they succeeded, not only will they not try again, but they might confess," I said. "Your way, they'll just say they didn't do anything, and it'll be my word against theirs. And since I'm now trying to divorce her and blaming him for the divorce, it'll look like I'm trying to set them up." "What are you suggesting?" he asked. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. We barely managed to arrange everything. If Ray had not held such a high position in our small police force, we might not have been able to cope. Bert was a big help too. We went online and found a wrecked Mustang that had recently been in an accident. We quickly hired a crew to paint the wrecked red car black to match mine, and they dumped him on the grass near the highway exit. Although we had to make it appear that the brakes had failed, we still had to destroy the grass and weeds near the wreckage. We did this by driving Bert's truck roughly through the brush a few times and sliding through it right behind the wreckage. Bert and Ray laughed at me when they saw my face. We returned to the wreckage and made some finishing touches. I wasn't prepared to damage my car, but we replaced the yellow fog lights to make the car look like mine. I also didn't want to let Bert remove the calipers from my car, but I had an idea about it. I was confident that Brittany wouldn't be able to tell my Brembo calipers apart from any others, so we painted the calipers on the wreckage black and had two officers fake a conversation for Brittany's benefit. I was sure it would work. We also generously doused the wreckage with starting fluid. Just before Brittany arrived, we set fire to the wreckage, let it burn properly, and then put out the flames when Brittany arrived. Once everything was ready, Ray left to make one more stop. He went to my employer and explained what was happening. Together, they announced my death to the entire company staff. It was interesting to know how the people you know and work with react to such news. Most of my colleagues were saddened by the news. Some of them began to speculate who would take my place. I wish I could see it myself. Ray later told me that he was absolutely sure that Christina had nothing to do with my death, unless she was the best actress on the planet. They had to call medical personnel to help her. He also noticed that her heart rate was going through the roof, and she had to be given medication and sent home. Even then, the counselors assigned to help everyone cope with grief could not console her. Ray asked me if there was anything I wanted to tell him, but we didn't have time to talk. While Ray went to break the news to Brittany, I sat in Bert's truck, wearing a disguise in case she saw me. My disguise was funny. I had a visor with long hair covering my short brown hair. I wore big sunglasses, and Bert glued long sideburns and a fake beard onto my face. When Ray and Brittany arrived, I saw pure shock on Brittany's face. Ray wasn't as convinced as I was. He was sure that Brittany knew about my accident before he reported it. In his opinion, the only thing that shocked her was that I died. He believed that Brittany hired someone to hurt me, but not kill me, but something went wrong. This is where two other elements of my plan came into play. The first was that the announcement at work had a purpose. Since the steroid king had a brother who worked in engineering with me, he would of course hear about my death. While we might not be able to observe his reaction as much as Brittany's directly, he will certainly try to contact or see her. The second element was that while Brittany stood in tears, looking at what was left of my smoking car, the technicians hired by my private investigator could examine the house and find out why my CCTV system was not working. If they couldn't determine the cause of the failure, they would have to install cameras that would function. Ray stayed with Brittany for some time. We understand Brittany was taken to the hospital after she collapsed again. Bert found the idea of Brittany fainting extremely funny. "That's what you get for marrying one of these Muslim young ladies," she laughed. "Hey, Bert," I said. "Brittany is about 5'6" tall, and your height, as I understand it, is 4'10". "I'm above this," she hissed. "I'm 5'1", and I'm not flat-chested like your Brittany. She may be taller than me, but she's built like a boy." I sat down and started laughing. "Bert, compared to you, everyone is built like a boy," I laughed. Bert and I went to get something to eat and waited for Ray to come back. When he returned, there was a smile on his face. "I think it's a draw," he said. I looked at him in bewilderment. "I was trying to figure out which of your women faints faster," he said. "They're swooning sisters," Bert laughed. "Ha ha ha. You two should be on a comedy channel," I said. "Ray, you can take me back to the house. I need a shower and sleep." "You can't go back into the house, Terry," he laughed. "You're dead, remember?" "But Brittany is in the hospital," I said. "She'll never know I was there." "Yes, but her lover is probably keeping an eye on the house to see when she returns," he said. "I'm going to hide you in a safe house. Wait a minute, I have a better idea." Bert and I followed Ray in her truck. I was still trying to understand why Bert continued to be with us, but I think she did what she liked. Ray drove slowly and made many sharp turns, as if he did not know where he was going. We caught up with him and noticed that he was looking down. "GPS," Bert snorted. "He doesn't know where we're going either." Finally, we stopped in front of a beautiful condominium complex. "We're going to the 4th floor," Ray said. We got into the elevator and went upstairs. We walked down the carpeted hallway and Ray stopped in front of the apartment. Someone could be heard crying inside. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. "Damn, we need to be quiet," he said. "Let me handle this," Bert said. "I'm a professional." She walked quietly to the door and Ray stepped aside. Bert extended her hand, holding her little finger at an angle. She took a deep breath and then kicked the door as hard as she could several times. "Open the damn door right now, you damn bitch," she screamed at the top of her voice. The door swung open and an angry Christina stood in front of Bert with fire in her eyes. "Oh, look," she said. "I thought I heard a mouse squeaking here, but he's a dwarf with double D breasts and a D brain." "I told you she's jealous of my breasts," Bert said. "They're double Fs, if you want to know the truth." "Nobody cares about your balloons, you hobbits," Christina said. "Have you forgotten the way back to the Shire? I'm sure Frodo misses you." "I have your Frodo here," said Bert. "And I." "Lady," Ray intervened. "She's not a lady," Bert said. "Mutually Gollum," said Christina. "Can we come in?" Ray intervened. You too can do it, Christina said. Ray and I went inside. I almost managed not to laugh. As Bert followed me, Christina sighed heavily. It's no surprise that True Blood got canceled, she said. It was complete nonsense. I thought vampires weren't allowed to enter a house without an invitation. She looked at Bert as she said this. GRRR, there's your vampire, Bert said. Christine, this is an official police matter, Ray said. We need to use your apartment. For what? Asked Christina. We need to hide an important witness here, Ray said. Shouldn't you be finding out who killed Terry, she said. That's not the point right now, Ray said. Will you help us? No, said Christina, until you find. Christy, you have to. I began. Her head whipped around as soon as I spoke. She looked at me and went weak in the knees. She came up to me and tore off my fake beard. You bastard, she screamed, hugging me. I thought you. I was so. She turned to Ray. He can stay, she said quickly. I'm not sure it's a good idea, Bert said. It's dirty here. What if he gets sick? I have a lot of space, and I'm a consultant working with the police, so he. Ray, get out of here and take that troll with you, Christina said. She pushed Ray and Bert out into the hallway and closed the door behind them. Christina literally rushed at me. She hugged me and couldn't stop laughing. It was strange. I'm so glad you're not dead, she sighed. That night we just sat on her couch and she hugged me. After a while it started to seem strange. I'm not used to women other than Brittany hugging me or holding me. I knew I had to come to terms with it, so I just let Christina do what she needed to do. We spent several days like this. They just didn't do anything. We watched movies, and Christina went and brought us food. I missed working on the car, but knew it would be a while before I saw both of my Mustangs again. The black one was in the police garage. Bert was said to have inspected every detail to make sure it was in order. The 67 was still disassembled into a million pieces in my garage. And speaking of a million pieces, my heart was broken in just as many. I had a hard time processing the fact that Brittany was part of the plan to kill me. The only time I was alone for more than a few minutes was when Christina decided she just had to go to my funeral. It wasn't a real funeral, it was a closed cremation. Christina returned with a video taken by the police at the ceremony. I saw that Brittany's parents, my fathers-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. Spots, were there. They seemed to really care about my death. I had to make it up to them somehow when it was all over. The biggest shock for me was Brittany herself. Brittany is beautiful anyway. Or at least it was. Brittany looked terrible at the funeral. Her eyes couldn't focus on anything and her head was tilting from side to side. Ray and another officer were to escort her to the location. It took me a while to notice it, but then I realized she was heavily sedated. Brittany was barely conscious. It was very sad to see this. I didn't even have the heart to hit her while she was like that, Christina said. This bitch is so depressed that they keep her under surveillance in case she decides to take her own life. I tried my best to keep a calm expression on my face. I was glad that Christina was so engrossed in her account of events that she did not look at me closely. All I could think about was that Brittany needed me. I wanted to rush to the hospital where she was and console her. Then I remembered that the reason Brittany was in the hospital was probably because she felt guilty for trying to kill me. It might have been even worse. Perhaps she just felt bad because she knew she had failed. 2 buckets were there too, she said. Who the hell are 2 buckets? I asked. Your little friend from another day, she said, looking at me out of the corner of her eye. One of the cops told me they nicknamed her 2 buckets because she wore a bikini to a police picnic a couple of years ago. Then they spent it on the beach. Basically, she was running around in a bikini and tore her bra. She ended up using 2 of the buckets that come with the kid's sandbox set and some rope. She wore a cute black dress to your funeral. It was funny. She's so small and her breasts are so big, she just looked fat in that dress. While she was talking, Christina was taking off her clothes. The jacket was thrown towards the door. She unbuttoned her blouse as she walked towards me. She paused only a moment to free herself from her long, tapered skirt. We looked into each other's eyes. "It will happen," she said. "Christy, I don't want to ruin our relationship," I said. "You're too important to me." "Yeah," she said. "You want me." Before I could answer, someone knocked on the door. Christina collected her clothes from the floor and ran to her room. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. I didn't see anyone. "Who's there?" I asked. "It's the fucking police," someone shouted. I opened the door and saw Bert there in the same black dress that Christina was talking about. Bertha entered the apartment through the open door, swaying her hips slightly. She ran her finger across the coffee table and looked at him. Christina came out of the bedroom, wearing a long robe. "Oh, damn," she said. "The kids have already come for trick or treating. I didn't even know it was Halloween." "You should have known," Bertha said. "Why else would you cover everything in a layer of dust if you didn't want to create a haunted house effect? Plus, you're wearing a skeleton costume under that robe." "Ha ha ha, very funny," Christina replied. "Ha ha back to you, Christina Angularis," spat Bertha. Christina and I looked at her, wondering what she was talking about. "My breasts are big enough to fill 2 buckets," said Bertha. "But real women have curves, and you only have lines. You have those small breasts that men hate." "So what are you doing here anyway?" spat Christina. "I started to think that nothing has been happening in the case since Terry has been here with you," Bertha said. "Maybe you're the criminal. If so, then it's not very safe for him to live with you. And maybe his crazy wife and her accomplices can't do anything because she's under constant surveillance," Brittany said. "That may indeed be true," said Bertha. "Where should I sleep?" "What are you talking about?" asked Christina. "If Ray is going to watch him during the day, then someone should watch him at night," Bertha said. "No problem, I'll take care of it," Christina said. "You have no police training," Bertha said. "You too," Christina laughed. "Aren't you some kind of mechanic for the police? You're obviously very suited to mechanic, and I really see a monkey." "Listen, little chest, I'm staying," said Bertha. She turned to me. "Where do you sleep, Terry?" Right here on this couch," I pointed at him. I didn't think Bertha needed to know that Christy was sleeping on the couch next to me. Plus, we didn't do anything other than cuddle, so it didn't matter. Christina was clearly annoyed, but could not think of a way to get rid of Bertha. Over the next few days, the 3 of us were inseparable. During the day, Ray and even my private investigators' technicians were here. However, at night, the 3 of us sat on the same couch, watching TV or playing board games. Finally, the day we have been waiting for has arrived. Brittany was sent home. She was medication-free and discharged on her own. I didn't really want her in my house, but Ray told me that the best way to end this situation was to get her to confess to her involvement in my alleged murder. He also reminded me that if this happened, my divorce would go smoothly and I would probably keep everything. It was also the day Christina had to return to work. She woke me up so we could have breakfast together. As she turned to leave, she leaned over and kissed me. I couldn't resist. She was a slender but well-built woman, and I hadn't had sex in weeks. "As soon as we get this pain out of my apartment, I'll take care of it for you," she whispered. She kissed me again and closed the door behind her. I didn't know what to think. Brittany always said that Christina had feelings for me. This more or less confirmed it. The problem was that I wasn't sure of my feelings for her. Of course, I am very attached to Christina, but I don't think it's anything more. There was little time to think. As soon as the door closed behind Christina, Bertha, who had obviously been pretending to be asleep, rose to her feet and walked towards me. In no time at all, we were having sex. That's all we did that day. One more dream and more sex. When the phone rang, Bertha answered it, but didn't. "Hello," she said. There was tension in her voice. She simply reached back and handed me the phone. It was Christina. She wanted to know if I wanted her to pick up something for dinner on the way home or for us to cook something together. I chose Chinese takeaway. I thought that this would give us time to clean up and ventilate the apartment. An hour later, When Christina returned home, she found me on the phone talking to my brother. Bertha, fully dressed, sat on the sofa and smiled like a Cheshire cat. "Why does it smell?" Christina began. "Because we've been having sex all day," Bertha began. "I was going to say it smells like air freshener," Christina said. She looked so upset that even Bertha was affected. "It really is an air freshener, flat chest," Bertha spat. "I was trying to cook dinner for us, and I burned one of your pots. I don't know how to cook on a stove like that." Bertha was great. It was her idea to put a couple of pots on the stove with some meat and let them burn. As the kitchen filled with smoke, we cleared the pots, sprayed air freshener throughout the apartment, showered separately, and waited for Christina to return home. Christina was clearly relieved. She could smell the air freshener, and if she sniffed hard enough, she could smell the burnt pan and meat underneath it. During dinner, Christina took my hand under the table. Whether it was guilt for what I had done or genuine feelings, I squeezed her hand back. Before we could finish dinner, someone knocked on the door. "Damn, there's been so many guests here lately," Christina said as she headed for the door. Behind her, Bertha whispered, "That's so sweet." She made gestures that imitated the way Christina held my hand. "It's so school-like," Bertha whispered. "Hey, where's my plate?" laughed my brother Ray as he entered the apartment. Another man, whom I recognized as one of my private investigators' technicians, entered, dragging a suitcase full of equipment. It took him about 20 minutes to set up what he had brought with him. Then we gathered around the computer screen and started watching. "Nice apartment," Berta grinned, looking at the video of my house. "Thanks, I'll probably do some repairs when this is all over," Christina said. Bertha only laughed louder and longer. Ray and I just looked at each other in confusion. None of us understood women. "Anyway," Ray began, "guess who came to see Brittany today? Her cousin." "Brittany doesn't have." I started, but then I saw him on the screen. Anger overwhelmed me. "That's him," I said. "He's quite nice," said Bertha. "I think you two are meant for each other," Christina smiled. "So far they've only been hinting and arguing, but they haven't said anything we could use," the technician said. We sat watching and listening. Fred seemed nervous. We all knew it just by looking at him. It became clear to us that he expected me to jump out at him at any moment. Brittany, on the other hand, was so overcome with a mixture of guilt and grief that her actions were difficult to read. On the one hand, she spent most of her time making sure he didn't touch my things. I wanted to hug her when she wouldn't even let him into the garage where they kept the parts for my 67. On the other hand, I couldn't wait to watch them in bed together. I was so full of anger that I wanted to run out and kill them both. In fact, it was Bertha who pointed out several important facts to me. "She thinks you're dead, remember?" she said. "You should also remember that she is scared to death and feels extremely guilty. She is not having sex with him. Rather, she is punishing herself and making sure she is not alone." "You women always support each other," I said. "Damn, I wish I could scare them," I said. "I wish there was a way to actually send my ghost there." "Damn it, this is it," Christina said. She jumped up and grabbed the phone. Christina spoke animatedly on the phone and then hung up after 10 minutes, leaving us all in disbelief. "He's flying in right now. He's between projects, but he's starting a new one in a week, so we have to finish everything before then," she said proudly. "Christy, who are we talking about?" I asked. "About my brother," she said proudly. "Is he a movie star?" asked a very interested Bertha. "No, he's more of a nerd," Christina said. "But he's a special effects wizard. He was part of the team that put on that Michael Jackson act at the awards show. If they can do a dance in front of a live audience, it won't be hard to convince two people that they're seeing a ghost." The next morning, Ray went to the airport to pick up Christina's brother. He wasn't who we expected. It was large, but also very botanical. He seemed clumsy and uncoordinated, but when it came to computers and science, he was great. He brought a lot of rental equipment with him and gave me a bill that was in the low 5 figures range. He looked at Bertha as if she were from another planet, but many men did that. "Don't worry," she whispered to me. I wouldn't sleep with that nerd. The next day, we split our time between watching Fred and Brittany's relationship deteriorate and watching Christina's brother, Alvin, assemble the necessary equipment from a pile of computers, lasers, and better separation mirrors. After Christina left to talk to the insurance company and sort out the issue of getting my insurance, Alvin and several other technicians set up 3 stages. One in our living room, one on the porch, and one on the street in front of my house. Each scene required a small set of hidden lasers and a small computer to control and synchronize the images. That evening, I was ready for my performance. We rented an empty storefront in town for my gigs and equipment storage. I had no idea how this technology actually worked. All I knew was that I had to stand in a certain spot and the laser would hit the beam separation mirror. Part of the remaining beam will expand and capture my image. The other part falls on another mirror and will be reflected differently. Both parts of the beam would be aimed and captured, and after that my head started to spin. All I knew was that it worked and could be sent electronically anywhere that had lasers and the computers needed to manipulate the images. That evening we gathered around and watched them on the computer screen. I stood ready. "T-E-E," I shouted. "Get ready," Alvin shouted. I didn't know what to do. I jumped into my seat and just stood there. I was looking at the screen when Fred, that steroid jock, walked into the living room, saw what really seemed to me, and froze in horror before running back upstairs to Brittany. We were all happy and looked at them. They were even more scared, and Brittany was even more racked with guilt. The next evening things were to be even better. That afternoon, Bertha fixed my brakes and put the wheels back on the car while Alvin worked on his equipment. While Alvin finalized his setup and went to buy or rent a few more things he thought would be useful, Christina and I were left alone. She kissed me. It didn't feel right, but I cared about her so much that I didn't want to reject her. She took off her clothes, and all I could do was compare her to Brittany in my mind. Christina had a very beautiful body. She was perfect in everything. We had sex. "I love you, Terry," she told me. "You don't have to reciprocate. I know you'll need time to get over Brittany. Your loyalty is one of the things I love most about you. You'll know when you feel it." That evening was even more tense. Brittany began to constantly quarrel and argue with Fred. Fred told her that as soon as they received the insurance money, he would leave. He made phone calls all day, trying to find out something. She even refused to cook food for him. They went to a fast food restaurant to have dinner. This angered Fred because, as a bodybuilder, he had to maintain a certain diet. When they returned to the house, Bertha started my engine several times. The sound was transmitted to a set of tiny speakers we buried in the front yard. Hearing this sound, they went into a state of panic. Fred was so scared that he pushed Brittany aside so he could get into the house faster. They argued about it. Brittany swore she recognized the sound of my car. Fred, on the other hand, was in a state of denial brought on by his fear. When they returned to the house and saw my holographic image, they both turned deathly pale. I have to admit that I enjoyed seeing the fear in Fred's eyes. The next evening was to be my crowning scene. I was going to scare them to death. However, things didn't go as I expected. The plan was that we would attack them from all sides. First, they will hear the sound of a car outside. When they go outside, they will see my hologram in the front yard. They will run back into the house, and my hologram will appear inside the house, chasing them. We wanted them to start blaming each other for my death, or at least admit to what they had done. We were almost sure they would break. They were already starting to attack each other. Alvin found a way to use video footage for holograms. It was good because I wanted to be there when the police came to take them to jail. Ray, myself, and a few other cops were hiding in the backyard across the street when the show started. At least this moment went as we expected. We were in constant contact with Alvin, who informed us what was happening in the house. Alvin told us that this was the right time because they were on the verge of a complete breakup. I was looking forward to the start of the performance. If my brother hadn't warned me not to make any noise so as not to give everything away, I would have performed my best supervillain laugh. We heard the sound of my Mustang's engine roaring. Damn, he sounded amazing. I wished at that moment that it sounded as good inside the car when I was driving it as it sounded outside. Suddenly, as we had planned, the door opened and they both ran outside to look around. I was amazed at how real the holograms looked. It seemed as if my car was actually parked on the street in front of the house. I watched as the door opened, and it felt like I was getting out of a car. Then the plan went awry. We saw Fred retreat from fear. However, Brittany reacted completely differently. "Terry, I made a mistake," she screamed, "but I never stopped loving you." "Love it," Fred shouted. Fred was a very big man. He wasn't used to being afraid of anyone or anything, so he pulled out something he thought would even the odds. Fred pulled out a gun and started shooting at the holographic image of me. The bullets went straight through the image and into the house across the street. I later found out that Fred bought a gun with silver bullets. Someone told him that silver bullets could stop the ghost. From that moment on, everything went in slow motion. Everyone acted on instinct. When Brittany saw Fred shooting at the hologram, she instinctively threw herself between Fred and the image. Fred, seeing that the silver bullets he had paid so much money for were not stopping the hologram, continued to fire. I never thought it was possible, but somewhere inside me, something broke, and I ran out of hiding and rushed at Brittany to protect her. Then Fred broke down. Seeing the two of me, he started shooting at both of them. When the fog cleared, 2 days had passed. My throat was as dry as the Sahara, and my left shoulder hurt like hell. I also had a headache that rivaled the worst migraines. I heard voices and crying. "For God's sake, Brittany, shut up," Bertha shouted. "It's all my fault," Brittany sobbed next to me. "It really is," I muttered. "Can you please be quiet? I have a headache." "After a few weeks of treatment and a little physical therapy, you'll be good as new." "We won't. Be happy," said Bertha. "Is Fred in jail?" I asked. "Did he confess?" "No and no," replied Bertha. "Fred won't admit to anything because he's dead. Your brother did it." "Anyway," Christina said, "it all worked out somehow. Terry, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I realized that what happened between us was, a mistake." "Christina, you're making a fool of yourself." Brittany's head whipped around, and she glared at Christina. "I can't believe you slept with my husband," she hissed. "You just couldn't wait, huh?" "He's not exactly your husband anymore," added Bertha. Brittany stood up from the chair she was sitting on. I noticed that on one of her graceful ankles she was wearing a large bracelet that looked like a watch. I also noticed that her leg was heavily bandaged. "Brittany, what's wrong with your leg?" I asked. "She was shot, Sherlock," Bertha said. "Am I going to have to deal with all this crap myself?" She looked around. "Hell yeah, looks like it is," she said. "So, Terry, Christina feels bad because she loves you." "No," Brittany screamed. "Brittany, sit down on your sore ass and shut up," Bertha spat. "If you interrupt me again, I'll tell Ray that you tried to take off your bracelet." Brittany's eyes filled with tears, and she sat up. She clearly didn't want to hear about what happened between Christina and me. "So, like I said, Christina feels bad because she loves you, but she cheated on you last night and the night before while you were unconscious. I was hoping she'd figure it out on her own, but it looks like you'll have to help me, Terry. When you had sex with Christina, how did you feel?" asked Bertha. "It made me feel good," I replied. "Do you want her?" asked Bertha. "Are you attracted to her, or did you just do it because she wanted to?" "I didn't want to hurt her feelings," I said, "because I really love her." Brittany began to sob, and Bertha glared at her. "Love without desire," said Bertha. "You love her like a sister, right?" I thought about it and realized that Bertha was right. "And you, Christina, be honest. Think about it. You felt the same way, didn't you? It wasn't what you got last night or the night before with another person, was it?" asked Bertha. "Probably not," Christina said. "And if you really loved him as much as you think you do, I don't think you would have cheated on him so early in the relationship. Heck, it took Brittany 5 years to cheat on him," Bertha said. But they still had sex, Brittany sobbed. I don't care if it wasn't good. Who said it wasn't good? Asked Bertha. Christina talked about it all the time. But I never got anything like that from Fred, Brittany said. I succumbed to desire and found myself used as a woman of easy virtue. And in exchange for this, I lost everything. I lost the man I loved to his damn secretary. He fell in love, and all I got was nothing. Terry, I didn't love Fred. I've never loved anyone but you. But you still humiliated me, I told her. Never, she blurted out. I was just lost. I made a bad decision, and it led to a series of other bad decisions. By the time I finally realized what was going on, you had already kicked me out of the house. You didn't even want to talk to me. For the man who swore to love me forever, you pretty quickly put me out on the street and jumped into bed with Christina. Why shouldn't I do it? I asked. For me, our marriage ended long before Christina and I slept together, and at least what we did was between two people who have feelings for each other. I didn't just give myself to the first person I met. What about what happened between us? Asked Bertha. Terry, did you sleep with her too? Brittany asked. Who's talking about sleep? Bertha said, and began to tell all the details of sex with me. Enough, Brittany screamed. Her eyes were so full of tears that she could hardly see. No, I got it, said Bertha. You instigated it, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was the best sex of my life. But honey, you don't have to worry. What happened between Terry and me was just sex. He loves you. He loves you. Not me and not Christina. At least, not in the in-love sense. But I don't love him either. I love his car. Does he really love me? Brittany asked. Her mood improved noticeably after this statement. Brittany, that man took a bullet for you. Why else would he do that? Asked Bertha, shaking her head. I don't love her anymore, I said angrily. Bertha just laughed. I was kept in the hospital for 3 more days for observation. Brittany came to the hospital every day. The first day we just glared at each other for an hour, and then she burst into tears. You did something to her that we never did, she cried. What difference does it make? I asked. Because all I did with him was regular sex, she spat. She looked me closely in the eyes as she spoke. You didn't use any protection, did you? She asked. At first, I didn't say anything. Bertha is taking her pills, I suggested. Even when I wasn't myself, I never risked getting pregnant. If I ever have a baby, it will be yours, she hissed. What do we do if you get one of them pregnant? Since we're gone now, you don't have to worry about that, I spat. After that, we just stared at each other again. The next day, she was late. From the beginning of the visitation time, I was worried about where she was. When she walked through the door, I was finally able to relax. You don't need to waste your time visiting, I said. Sorry, I'm late, she said. I had to testify to the prosecutor again. If I didn't do this, I would be sent to prison, and it also takes a long time to get from my parents' house to the city center. Why don't you stay in the house? I asked. I thought you didn't want me there, she said. You'll obviously get everything in the divorce, even if I don't go to jail. She started crying again. Brittany, calm down, I said. Terry, Fred promised me that you wouldn't be hurt too much, she sobbed. You had to be. For you to need me to take care of you. I thought it would work and I could get you back. I swear. All I wanted was to get you back. Brittany, I'll call Ray, I said. I won't sue you. Terry, I'll go to prison gladly if you'll wait for me, she cried. I will spend the rest of my life happily in prison if you don't divorce me. Brittany, I began. Terry, I know you still love me, she said. I made a mistake. I made the worst mistake, and I'll spend my whole life making up for it. I was a spoiled, ungrateful bitch, but I learned my lesson. I swear I'm going to be the best wife in the world. Can you just think about it? When I was discharged, Brittany came to take me home. She took care of me like a little child. She came home every day and stayed with me all day. One evening, I noticed how tired she was. She ended up falling asleep on the couch and apologized for it the next morning. I told her it was no problem and that she could use the guest room while we sorted out our relationship. Ray and I both testified on Brittany's behalf, and she received 2 years probation. She got her sentence commuted because she cooperated with prosecutors to help bring mechanic Fred to justice, and because Ray and I stood up for her. It was also the first time she found herself in trouble with the law. As the strength in my shoulder began to return and the headaches began to subside, I returned to work. Brittany still came every day. She even came to my work and brought me lunch. One of these days, as we sat together in my office, I was surprised by Bertha's appearance. To my surprise, Bertha came not to me, but to Christina. They now lived together. What surprised me even more was that the mystery person Christina was having sex with turned out to be Bertha. When we got home that evening, I decided to offer Brittany a better option for dividing her property in the event of a divorce. She was horrified. "Brittany, I'm just trying to make you happy," I said. "If you want a house, you can keep it." "Terry, all I want is you and another chance," she said. "I love you, Terry. If you want a divorce, I'll give it to you. But I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm not going to help you leave me." We didn't discuss divorce anymore. A few days later, I was back working on 67. When I opened the garage to look at the car, the first thing I noticed was that all my parts were neatly laid out. My tools were also neatly laid out. All my drawings and plans were neatly placed on the wall where I could look at them. I turned to go into the house and thank Brittany, but she was already standing there. "This is fine," she asked. I simply nodded. Brittany stepped into the garage, and I saw what she was wearing. She was wearing a light blue shirt, the kind that gas station mechanics wear. Her name was embroidered on the left chest pocket. "I'm your assistant," she said. I simply nodded and began to disassemble the remaining parts from the frame. Brittany handed me the tools. "You're wrong about me, you know. It's not one-sided love." "What?" I asked. "The first day I came home after you sent me to my parents, you hummed a song. This song," she said. She pressed a button on the stereo in the garage. "That song was One Way Love from the movie Better Off Dead. I remember humming it while trying to ignore Brittany. Remember the line I fell too hard, 'Apparently I'm not the same'?" She handed me a screwdriver. "You were always the one, Terry. I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you. Looking into the night, I don't know where you are. Calling your name, it's a crazy feeling. I'm one-sided love." "It took me a while to figure it out," she said. "You thought you loved me more than I loved you. And maybe in the old days that was true. I was young and spoiled and didn't think about anyone but myself. But now that I know what it means being without you, everything has changed. I need you, Terry, and I love you more than you could love me. Remember when that idiot Fred started shooting at your ghost, and I tried to jump in front of him?" she asked. I was listening to the song and thinking about that part. I listened to the chorus of the song. "I'd rather be stupid. I'll get lost with someone new. I'd rather be dead than live without you. I searched every day trying to find another way. I'd rather be dead than live without you. That's why I jumped in front of the bullets," she said. "I'd rather be dead than live without you, Terry." There were no further words. I took her hands in mine and pulled her to the floor. If this were a romantic movie, we would have sex right there on the garage floor. However, this floor was concrete. After the kiss, I picked her up and carried her to our bedroom. We lay in each other's arms, each other in a way that only people who truly love each other can. "Terry, I don't want to catch you in anything, but this is my most fertile time," she said. "I'll go back on the pills if you want, because our future status is still a little uncertain, and we didn't use protection that night. All this told me that we belonged together. However, from the moment Brittany and I got together, I knew there would be no divorce. I also knew that neither of us would ever love anyone else with the same intensity, and I was wrong. 2 years later, I stood in church holding Christina's hand. Christina was finally going to be the last Mrs. Stevens. She became Mrs. Ray Stevens. Christina was marrying my brother, and I walked her down the aisle. This was our second wedding this summer. 5 weeks ago, Bertha married Christina's brother, Alvin. As the priest spoke his words, I looked up to the third row and saw my pregnant wife, Brittany, sitting next to the only person I loved as much as she did, our almost 2-year-old daughter, Terry. Brittany and I were fine. I'd like to say we lived happily ever after, but until that happens, we can't say that for sure. I think this is one of the reasons why our marriage is so strong. We know firsthand that anyone can make a mistake and make a decision that costs them everything. Brittany knows better than most wives what will happen if she slips up again, and neither of us is willing to risk that. Any of us would rather be a fool. We'll be lost with someone new. We're better off dead. You know the rest. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.